Chapter 257. Boom! There was a violent explosion of flames. Grimm's tall, flaming body appeared in a sea of fire, and a large flame barrier instantly shot out. Combined with the elemental flames that were everywhere in the air, he managed to catch up to Carlos before he could escape. Carlos's gray defensive spell was burnt red by the elemental flames. In the next second, two violent lava fireballs exploded beside him. However, a strange skull made of pure, gray smoke suddenly appeared and entered Grimm's body. Grimm's vision went black, and he was blinded for a moment. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Carlos, who was burnt black all over, escaped from the range of the lava fireball in a sorry state. He quickly fled outwards. He had made a wise choice. As soon as his figure left, a huge lava hand reached out from the ground and slapped the spot where he was just standing. Boom! The earth trembled. A terrifying black-red handprint was left on the ground, and the churning magma filled up the half-meter-deep mud pit in the shortest time possible. Immediately after, the majestic Lord of the Flames drilled out from the ground and roared soundlessly at the place where Carlos had disappeared. Grimm, who had just finished a pincer attack on Carlos, was also attacked by Mycelion. The two of them passed each other. Grimm used his whip to disperse half of the strange black smoke around Carlos's body, and Mycelion successfully left a millstone-sized ball of black smoke behind him. During this period, Grimm had tried to use the 6 instant-cast spells stored in the secret voodoo scroll to kill Carlos, but he had never been able to catch Carlos's figure. The layer of strange black smoke around Mycelion's body was not only extremely corrosive, but it also seemed to have a special ability to block perception. Grimm had fought with Carlos for so long, but he had never been able to lock onto Carlos's position. This led to the current embarrassing situation. Grimm had been trying his best to cooperate with the Lord of the Flames to attack Carlos, but every time he was interrupted by Carlos's strange curse spells, it was difficult for him to succeed. While he was attacking Carlos with all his might, Mycelion was also constantly attacking and damaging his body. Although the elemental body of fire was not as lethal as a human's body, it was still the most important carrier of Grimm's consciousness. Once the carrier collapsed, Grimm's consciousness would lose the protection of his powerful body. That would be the time for him to be slaughtered. Perhaps he realized the danger he was in. Grimm immediately changed his tactics. In the next second, his tall, flaming body crashed into a sea of fire and disappeared in an instant. This time, it really disappeared. It was no longer a flame leap. Ever since he disappeared, he never showed himself again. It was as if he had completely merged into the sea of fire. Hence, only the Lord of the Flames was left in the field, taking heavy steps as it chased after the cunning Carlos. As for the giant fire spirit, it had died a long time ago. Carlos was indeed a veteran dark sorcerer. Almost every time he moved, he would scatter a large area of dark elemental halo. The dark elements that dispersed like a tide weren't used to attack, but to destroy the terrifying sea of elemental flames. However, while he was destroying the sea of elemental flames, the Lord of the Flames that was chasing after him was spreading the sea of fire. As the two chased, the entire battlefield was filled with smoke. However, within the sea of fire, Grimm's consciousness, which no one could detect, was constantly moving around. Every time they arrived at the center of a fire field, a strange face would be condensed in the raging elemental flames. The face had no body. It blinked its eyes and looked around. When it didn't find the enemy, it would quickly disperse and disappear into the flames. In the next second, in another area of the fire, Grimm condensed another face and looked around for traces of the enemy. He was looking for traces of Mycelion, but she was also looking for him. A strange ball of black smoke darted in and out of the gaps in the fire, calling out to Carlos, who was not far away. The spiritual connection between the two had never been broken. That kid is hiding very well. He's already completely elemental and can hide in the flames at any time. It's very difficult to find him by randomly bumping around. Mycelion finally couldn't help but suggest, try to attack the elemental puppet and lure it out. We'll try to pincer it again. Oomph! Carlos laughed sinisterly. Why don't you show yourself and lure it out? That kid's soul equipment hasn't been used yet. If you want to try, go ahead. I'm not stupid enough to be a target. Since that's the case, let's attack together and get rid of that elemental puppet first. Without help, its sea of fire will only become smaller and smaller. It'll be easier to fight later. All right, wait for my signal. We'll attack together next time. Carlos moved quickly in the midst of the fire and once again scattered a ring of gray smoke to form an elemental halo. In an instant, all the fire elements within 100 meters were destroyed. Behind him, the clumsy and sluggish Lord of the Flames took large steps forward. It sent a series of exploding fireballs towards Carlos while raising its large hands, intending to set up another sea of fire. However, at this moment, Carlos, who had been running away, suddenly turned around and dodged the incoming fireballs. A huge amount of dark elemental energy condensed into a terrifying spear that pierced through the Lord of the Flames' lava shield and pierced into its chest. At the same time, Mycelion suddenly appeared behind the Lord of the Flames, her hands covered in black smoke suddenly piercing into the lava body of the Lord of the Flames. Large black spots quickly spread across the dark red body of the Lord of the Flames. Although the Lord of the Flames had the strength of a magus, it was still not a true intelligent being. Facing the pincer attack of two veteran magi, its resistance had caused quite a bit of damage to them, but it still could not escape its fate of destruction. Sensing the warning from the node of the Lord of the Flames, Grimm's large body of flames quickly formed in the nearest field of fire. It was a pity that the cunning Carlos had already destroyed all the fire elements within 100 meters. The moment Grimm appeared, he was already 120 meters away from the Lord of the Flames. The black spots and gray shadows quickly spread across the body of the Lord of the Flames and inevitably entangled the most important crystal core in its body. Sensing that the crystal core was about to be destroyed, Grimm gritted his teeth and ordered the Lord of the Flames to self-destruct. As the Lord of the Flames had accompanied Grimm for half a year and helped him overcome many difficulties, it could already be considered the most powerful magic puppet under his command. However, today, in a war between magi families and under the pincer attack of two veteran magi, Grimm could only harden his heart and abandon it. Grimm's decisiveness had obviously exceeded the expectations and judgment of the two magi. The special existence of a magic puppet made the crystal core into a miniature bomb of elemental energy. This was especially so when a wizard-level magic puppet was forced to self-destruct. The terrifying power of the explosion caused the expressions of the two veteran magi to change. Carlos had been roaming around the periphery and quickly retreated when he sensed the abnormality of the Lord of the Flames. Mycelion, on the other hand, was engaged in close combat with the Lord of the Flames. It was already too late for her to retreat when she sensed the chaotic elemental energy within the Lord of the Flames. An earth-shattering explosion rang out. A terrifying mushroom cloud slowly rose from the center of the battlefield. A violent hurricane swept out in all directions, bringing with it a sky-high flame. In an instant, half of the outer wall of the castle collapsed. The terrifying heat and terrifying flames swept out, incinerating all life forms that lacked elemental protection into ashes and scattering them into the distance. In an instant, the buildings in the castle collapsed. Even the heavily protected side of the castle that faced the battlefield was scorched black by the terrifying flames. As for the buildings on the periphery, they had already melted like cheese and turned into mud. If even a castle protected by a sturdy wall was in such a state, the Alliance army of the Terrace Lord who had come from afar was even more miserable. As the terrifying line of fire swept past, the servants who lacked protection were instantly turned into ashes, leaving behind strange human-shaped scorch marks on the ground. More than 90 steel warriors who had luckily escaped from the previous attack were met with disaster in this wave of flames before they could even get far. Their numbers were instantly halved. After the line of fire passed, the sparse remaining warriors could not even form a team. Not far away, the two magi, Corgan and Kellen, who were tangled together, stopped in shock and turned their attention to the terrifying scene of fire that was as red as the Crimson World. Wasn't it just a border conflict between Magi families? How? How could there be such a huge commotion? Could it be that they were going to put their lives on the line? At the center of the terrifying explosion, the once tall and mighty figure of the Lord of the Flames had disappeared. In its place was a terrifying pit with a diameter of 50 meters and a depth of 10 meters. Boiling magma was churning endlessly within it. The terrifying temperature of 4,000 degrees Celsius and the scorching heat had stirred up the air above the pit into pieces. Rays of brilliant crimson aurora floated in the air, looking extremely beautiful. However, any magus with a clear mind would not be mesmerized by such a beautiful scene, nor would they get close to those illusory lights. Because those were the elemental phantoms that were projected from a void after the space was shattered. With the defensive abilities of a level 1 magus, if one were to be sucked into the shattered space, there would be no chance of escaping alive. At that moment, at the edge of the pit, a charred body crawled out of the churning magma, staggering forward slowly. Behind him, there was a long trail of burnt footprints that were still burning. With the flashes of spells, the remaining flames on the charred body were finally extinguished with difficulty. Mycelion opened his charred, cracked lips and spat out a mouthful of hot air. Just as he was about to take out a potion to treat himself, he suddenly froze. In front of him, Grimm's scarlet eyes were fixed on him, and the pages of the secret voodoo scroll in his hand were flipping rapidly. A powerful elemental force was gathering rapidly. "No, we can talk," Mycelion shrieked. Chapter 258. Mycelion was dead. A veteran magus with decent strength had died on a lowly battlefield. Such a shocking fact made it hard for both sides to accept. The Chaltea Hills had a circumference of 120 miles. There were 3 cities, 1 large and 2 small ones, as well as 7 or 8 human villages. Even if these manors and villages were crushed into powder and converted into magic crystals, they would not be able to match the true value of a veteran magus. Therefore, the alliance of the 3 parties was more to test the strength of the Cerubo family on behalf of the forces behind them. If the Cerubo family had suffered losses in the Planar War, they would definitely retreat and give up some of their benefits. They would then trade space for time to recover their strength. It could be said that border wars like this happened almost every day in the Tower Forest region, and the number of magus families and organizations involved was not small. However, it was rare for a magus to die because of this. As one of the parties involved in this invasion, Carlos of the Michel family could only helplessly announce his side's defeat. Both sides sat down again to negotiate the compensation. The cities that had been occupied had to be spat out, and the villages that had been plundered had to be compensated double. The Michel family even had to take out large amounts of precious resources to compensate for the Cerubo family's losses. As long as the Michel family did not want to escalate the conflict between both sides into an all-out family war, today's matter would come to an end. As for how the Michel family would compensate the Black Hand Association that Mycelion belonged to, that was another matter altogether. Grimm and Kogan, on the other hand, returned to Ferdinand City after hastily settling things here. However, after this battle, Grimm's terrifying reputation as a fire demon had spread. To be able to kill a veteran magus in a 1 versus 2 situation was a miracle for a newly advanced magus. It was said that a few days after the battle, many magi had rushed to Rockall Castle to examine the traces of the battle there. Every magus who had seen the battlefield had a solemn expression on their faces. To be honest, the place had become a scene of desolation and was no longer suitable for humans to live in. It was as if a violent volcano had once erupted there. The battlefield was filled with lava that was left behind after it had cooled down and flowed across the ground, breaking apart some of the strangely standing lava rocks. One would find some basically intact metal armor within, while the flesh and blood within the armor had already been mixed with the molten iron, becoming difficult to separate. Rockall Castle, which was the closest to the battlefield, had suffered a terrifying spell attack. More than half of the castle's buildings had softened into mud and then solidified into a strange shape. Fortunately, with the compensation from the Mycon family, Viscount Tanner would have more than enough to rebuild 5 castles. After this battle, the disturbances against the Cerubo family naturally disappeared without a trace. Many families and organizations that had originally wanted to take advantage of the Cerubo family all gave up and began to observe again. However, Grimm had successfully earned the hatred of the Black Hand Association. After Grimm returned to Ferdinand City, he learned that the Black Hand Association was only a small organization with 7 wizards. Apart from their president, who was a Tier 2 magus, Mycilon was the strongest Tier 1 magus in the organization. After receiving this information, Grimm smiled and threw his hatred to the back of his mind. With the support of his family, the Tier 2 magus would not take the initiative to cause trouble for him. Otherwise, the Tier 3 magus of the Cerubo family would slaughter his Black Hand Association in a matter of minutes. As long as it was a fair duel, Grimm was not afraid of any Tier 1 sorcerer when he was filled with killing intent. Since Grimm had contributed a lot to the battle at Rockhole Castle, Wizard Kogan took out a portion of the compensation from the Mycon family to compensate for his losses. 20,000 magic crystals, 5 contribution points, a large amount of Magus resources, and 3 Magus rank elemental crystal cores. With these, Grimm could naturally hide in the Wizard Tower in Ferdinand City and not take a step out, recovering his strength day and night. It had to be said that Mycilon's strange black smoke and Carlo's powerful curse had affected him quite a bit. It was only until the 7th day after the battle that he expelled all the negative spells from his body and adjusted his body to its peak condition. Through this battle, Grimm could clearly see his strengths and weaknesses, and he began to plan for his future as a magus. On the battlefield, the might of fire spells was undoubtedly the strongest, and this had already been proven. However, in a small battle between magi, the huge power of fire spells could not be fully unleashed. It could be said that without the self-destruction of the Flame Lord and the powerful instantaneous spells from the secret voodoo scroll, it would be impossible for Grimm to win in a 1 versus 2 battle. Therefore, if Grimm wanted to maintain his advantage in battle, strengthening his own strength was the only way out. However, he could not rush the growth of his spiritual force. He could only rely on daily meditation to increase it. Of course, searching for some suitable spiritual potions or ingredients with good nourishment was also a way to go about it. However, this was an extremely long process. Therefore, if he wanted to strengthen his strength in a short period of time, magic puppets and runes from another world were the most promising directions. Moreover, he had promised the magus in the Dark Crypt that he would go to Sky City in half a year's time. Therefore, after thinking deeply for a while, Grimm decided to first conquer the runes from another world and use them to strengthen his magic tattoos and magic puppets before considering other things. Moreover, he had obtained a lot of resources and strange items from his trip to another world. He needed some time to consolidate his foundation and make up for the lack of knowledge in Magus spells. Therefore, for the next month, Grimm hid in the Wizard Tower and did not go out. He spent all his time in the Magus laboratory and did not show his face again. Of course, during this period, Grimm did not completely isolate himself from the world. He still maintained contact with the outside world. On the 3rd day of his seclusion, the little lowly Alice, who had gone out on a mission, came back and met him. It had been 3 or 4 months since they last met, and Grimm had to admit that Alice's strength had improved greatly. At this rate, it would only take a year or so for Alice to reach the requirements to advance to a magus. "Give it to me." Alice barged into Grimm's room and opened her small hands. "What?" Grimm was confused. "Of course it's my gift." Alice rolled her eyes in annoyance. "You went to another world and didn't bring back any gifts, right?" Grimm was speechless. Alice, it's like I'm your master. You're just a maid, yet you want to get something from me without doing anything? I'm afraid." Hearing this, Alice, who was still angry just now, immediately smiled like a flower. "Dear master, beloved master, what do you need the lovely Alice to do for you?" Seeing Alice's fearless expression, Grim could not help but feel a headache coming on. He then sneered, "Since you grew up in a rich family, don't you know what a maid can do? Bed service." Alice cheered excitedly. "Yay, yay. How about tonight? Tonight, the cute Alice will come and warm your bed for you." Grim put his hand to his forehead, completely speechless. Although he knew that Alice was just a glib talker, facing a little lowly with a body and face that looked like that of a 7-year-old, Grim could not advance or retreat as freely as he would when facing an enemy. Counting on his fingers, Alice was almost 17 years old. However, with her lowly body and childish face, it was difficult to treat her as someone of the same age. If her talent was ordinary, with such a rebellious personality, Grim would have long thrown her to one side to eat dirt. However, after personally witnessing the magic of a top-notch Witch of Fate, Grim could not help but be curious about Alice's Witch of Fate title. If he could personally nurture a prophet that belonged to him, it would definitely be of great significance to him in the future. It was precisely because of this that Grim had strong expectations for Alice. If there was a chance to get closer to her, Grim would definitely not be stingy. Grim raised his head and thought for a moment. It seemed that the only thing he had that would be useful to her and would not be too shabby was that thing. Thinking of this, Grim waved his hand and activated the defensive spell of the residence. A faint layer of fluorescent light appeared on the walls, floor, and ceiling of the residence. This way, even those who had the highest authority in the Wizard Tower would not be able to pry into the secrets of his residence without alerting Grim's senses. What do you want?" Alice suddenly took a step back, her hands tightly grasping her collar. Her panicked eyes darted around, looking panicked and cowering. With your beansprout-like figure, who would have any interest in you?" Grim said unhappily. "Didn't you want a gift? Here, this is the gift I brought you." After saying this, Grim took out a gray cloth bag from his storage belt and reluctantly handed it to Alice. "As long as you're not interested in me, what kind of gift is this? It looks so ugly." Alice pinched her nose and gently picked up the cloth bag with 2 fingertips. The cloth bag was obviously not a magic artifact. It was just an ordinary bag made of coarse linen. Not only was it old and tattered, but when the bag was opened, there was a rotten smell. Seeing the simple packaging of the gift, Alice instantly lost confidence in the contents inside. She choked on her nose and resisted the nausea. She took out a strange gray stone the size of a fist. "This is the gift you brought back from the other plane? It's just a broken stone." Alice rolled her eyes and was about to throw the stone away. However, as soon as the gray stone left her palm, it outlined a fluorescent silver line in the air. Before the stone fell to the ground, the silver line began to vibrate, and the void in front of her vaguely opened a small hole. The stone seemed to have its own intelligence, and in the blink of an eye, it was about to enter the void hole and disappear from this plane. Alice's ear-piercing scream finally sounded. Chapter 259. Void Stone. When the gray stone did not show any abnormalities, it looked like an ordinary pebble picked up from the side of the road. However, when it showed signs of abnormalities, it was like a beautiful woman who had just caught a glimpse of it, about to disappear in front of the two. Alice let out an ear-piercing shriek, but her hands weren't idle either. She stretched out her little hand and reached into the void, forcibly grabbing that piece of void stone again. Grim was speechless as he watched this scene, the corners of his mouth twitching uncontrollably. A strange void stone. However, what was even more bizarre was Alice's innate spatial talent. Grim had seen very clearly that Alice had reached into the spatial crack with her bare hands, yet she did not seem to be afraid of being cut by the spatial fragments. Of course, the AI, Chip's high-speed motion capture, had also discovered a thin layer of spatial membrane on Alice's delicate white watch. The spatial membrane formed by this innate talent was probably the main reason why she could touch the spatial fragments without getting hurt. Alice grabbed the void stone tightly and placed it on her forehead, carefully feeling the obscure spatial undulations within it. The smile on her face grew wider. Suddenly, Alice leaned forward and kissed Grim on the cheek. She then took a step back and lightly adjusted the hem of her skirt to perform a standard maid's curtsy. "Thank you, master. I like this gift a lot." She then ran out like a gust of wind. From the looks of it, she could not wait to use the Void Stone for some special experiment. Grim could understand Alice's excitement. She was currently stuck at the level of a quasi-magus. If she wanted to successfully advance to become a magus, the only thing she needed to do was to grasp a trace of the laws of the plane related to her innate talent in space. Then, with this trace of laws as the center, she could condense a core of her own consciousness in her space of consciousness. The Void Stone was undoubtedly a physical manifestation of the laws of space in the multiverse. It definitely contained an extremely special power of the laws of space. This was a perfect match for Alice's innate talent. As long as she could draw the power of the laws of space into her space of consciousness, the core of her consciousness, which was the key to advancing to become a magus, would be a success. Once Alice advanced to become an official magus, with her special innate talent in space, she could become a powerful magus in a matter of minutes. Grim felt his legs cramping at the thought of her enhanced spatial travel and spatial shattering. Without the support of the demonic puppets and the buff from the Balrog's transformation, even Grim would be crushed by Alice in a one-on-one duel. Therefore, in order to maintain the dominance of his identity as the master, he had to quickly increase his own strength. After sealing the door, Grim got up and went to his secret room. This was where all the spoils of war he had obtained from the Knight's Plane were stored. It was also the stepping stone for him to become stronger in the future. He walked to the side of the wooden table and lifted a piece of black cloth. A disgusting aura of depravity assaulted his senses. This was a flame demon's heart the size of a head. Its dark red flesh, thick tendons, and surging life energy mixed with the chaotic aura unique to the lower layer, forming the unique and strange bloody and murderous aura of abyssal creatures. This fire demon's heart had been separated from the main body for a long time, but under the stimulation of witchcraft power, it still possessed a strong vitality. As the giant peach-like heart trembled slightly, a dark red energy lingered around it, making one feel nauseous. Grim stretched out a finger, condensing a trace of witchcraft power at his fingertip, and lightly touched the flame demon's heart. Immediately, the area where Grim's finger touched the flame demon's heart ignited with a dark green abyssal flame. This flame obviously had the sinister, corrosive, and devouring characteristics unique to the abyssal world. It quickly spread from the flame demon's heart to Grim's finger. Even with Grim's flaming body, he could feel a slight pain from his fingertip. It was as if this abyssal flame could burn through his flaming body and directly harm his spiritual world. Grim frowned slightly, and violent elemental flames gathered at his fingertip. Finally, he extinguished the abyssal flame with absolute numbers. As expected, it was a powerful force. Grim crouched down and held his breath, blue light flickering in the depths of his black pupils. Beep. Detected a special bioactive specimen. Basic data has been recorded in the database. Requesting host to name it Flame Demon's Heart. Beep. Bioactive specimen Flame Demon's Heart has been recorded. Show me the sample data of the Flame Demon's Heart. Following Grim's order, a 3D hologram of the Flame Demon's Heart suddenly appeared in his mind, spinning gently. Beside the hologram, data poured down like a waterfall, filling up the space in Grim's mind. Grim closed his eyes in concentration, filtering out most of the trivial data, leaving only some basic biological data that was easy for him to understand. Bioactive specimen, 46%, can be strengthened. Bioactive specimen, 1,155 degrees of energy, can be strengthened. Bioactive specimen, 135 degrees of energy output, can be strengthened. Life energy conversion rate, 41%, can be strengthened. Abyssal aura retention rate, 18%, can be reduced. Grim opened his eyes and straightened his body, looking down at the flame demon's heart. His heart was filled with intense desire and uncontrollable passion. With the slow growth of his spiritual force, this flame demon's heart might be the only hope for him to maintain his powerful strength. Ever since the first day he obtained the flame demon's heart, Grimm had been thinking about how to use its immense power. With the AI chip doing a lot of searching and filtering in its database, the only way Grimm could use the flame demon's heart was when he transformed into a flame demon. Only after transforming into a flame demon, with his vitality and spiritual force doubled, would Grimm be able to control and use the flame demon's heart. Otherwise, the energy harvested from a rank 2 abyss flame demon's heart would turn into a furnace that would go out of control and burn Grimm to death in his human form. After combining hundreds and thousands of ways to use the heart, the AI chip provided Grimm with a feasible plan. Normally, he would seal the flame demon's heart in his body and use his own aura to slowly transform it. When the time came for battle and he transformed into a flame demon, he would unseal the flame demon's heart and use it to supply energy to the flame demon's body. This way, he would be able to increase his battle strength. However, in order to do this, there were a few problems that had to be solved. First, Grimm had to get rid of the dense abyssal aura in the flame demon's heart. At the very least, he had to suppress it to an acceptable level. Otherwise, the longer he used it, the more closely he would fuse with the flame demon's heart, and the higher the chances of him becoming an abyssal creature. Although the strength of abyssal creatures was well known, and Grimm did not reject the power he possessed, the chaos and tyranny in their nature was intolerable. According to Grimm's knowledge, the template of an abyssal creature was basically a brainless monster with +10 in vitality, strength, and spiritual force, but -100 in intelligence. Could uncontrollable power still be called power? Hence, before he could get rid of the flame demon's heart, Grimm could only use it carefully and not rely on it too much. Secondly, according to the AI chip scans, there were many areas where the flame demon's heart could be strengthened. In order to maximize its power, Grimm would need a large amount of resources to feed it. The AI chip provided a dense amount of data, but the ones that could truly be of use were the ones that he had filtered out. The activity of the muscles determined the efficiency of the flame demon's heart. 46% meant that it only had half of its peak strength. The upper limit of the energy storage and the threshold of the energy output determined the current strength of the flame demon's heart. The energy heart was the magic organ of an abyssal flame demon, so it could naturally store a certain amount of fire elemental energy. 1,155 degrees meant that it could store 1,155 degrees of fire elemental energy when it was not in combat. This was something that Grimm could use it while during combat. However, no matter how much energy it stored, the threshold of the output still limited the strength of the fire elemental energy that Grimm could use. 135 degrees meant that each of Grimm's fire elemental energy attacks could reach a maximum of 135 degrees. This strength far exceeded Grimm's current strength. It had to be known that most spells cast by a rank 1 magus had energy levels between 60 and 80 degrees. Grimm had chosen to specialize in fire, and had given up on other elemental spells to increase the power of his fire elemental spells to 115 degrees. And this level of energy was the limit of Grimm's current strength. However, this flame demon's heart could reach a threshold of 135 degrees, even though it was only half effective. As the energy heart of a rank 2 abyssal flame demon, its strength was evident. With 1,155 degrees of energy stored, based on the attack power of a single spell of 135 degrees, it was enough for Grimm to unleash his strongest attack 8 times with some left over. This would be of great help to him in increasing his strength. His life force conversion rate of 41% meant that even in combat, Grimm had the ability to convert his life force into fire elemental energy. This endless replenishment would allow Grimm to become a terrifying war machine. As long as he was alive, he would never run out of energy. It was a pity that there was still a lot of work to be done to make use of such a powerful flame demon's heart. He could only slowly deal with it in the future. Grim nodded in satisfaction and covered the flame demon's heart with the black cloth again. The strange thing was that although this black cloth looked ordinary, the moment it was covered, the abyssal aura that had filled the secret room disappeared in an instant. This proved that this ordinary-looking piece of black cloth was actually a magic tool that specialized in concealing the aura of different types of energy. In the secret room, apart from the flame demon's heart, there were also 2 void stones for Magus-grade elemental crystal cores, the mysterious golden apple, the deception orb, the Hikila resonance crystal, the flame emblem, and the Xandra sheep transformation rod. Chapter 260. South Felder City, Magus Tower. Grim sat quietly in front of his desk, unfurling a piece of parchment. Based on his memories, he slowly wrote down a strange rune. The runes from another world have been sorted and filtered by the AI chip. Apart from the 122 basic runes that were common between the 2 planes, there were also 23 variant runes and 28 new runes. The variant runes referred to the runes from another world that were similar to the rune system of the Magus world. However, there were slight changes due to the difference in the power systems of the 2 planes. However, apart from the variant runes, there were 28 new runes that were not present in the rune system of the Magus world. Hence, if Grim wanted to modify them into something that could be used by Magi, he could only experiment and create new runes one by one. After 3 days of nonstop deduction, the AI chip had finally analyzed a new rune and converted it into a rune form that was recognized by the Magus world. The rune that he had written on the parchment represented recovery in the Knight's Plane. Engraved in a rune formation would give a person double the recovery rate. However, in the Magus world, as the rune was completed, a faint purple glow began to gather on the parchment. Immediately, a strange monster's hand stretched out from the parchment, slowly probing its surroundings. On the palm of the monster's hand, there was a strange eye. The size of the eye was similar to that of a human's, but the white and purple pupils were a little frightening. What was even more frightening was that it was still blinking, as if it was observing the situation over here. Grim sat still, the fire elemental energy in his body slowly gathering. He asked in a deep voice, "Are you a monster or a life form from another world? Can you understand what I'm saying?" The AI chip's prompt sounded in his mind. Detected abnormal force field fluctuations, currently invading the host's spiritual senses. Initial diagnosis is an illusion. Requesting host's instructions to cut it off? The monster's hand finally stopped moving aimlessly and pointed its palm at Grim. The strange eye suddenly closed, and when it opened again, it was blood red. Red mist sprayed towards Grim's face like a tidal wave. Grim couldn't bear it any longer and roared, a violent lava fireball exploding in front of him. The magma shield rose in time to block the splashing lava and magma, and the strange monster's hand disappeared. Even the witchcraft-protected desk was completely destroyed, and the scene was a mess. Grim sighed helplessly. He released the defense spell and contacted the wizard tower genie. "Help me repair my room. Skin found severe witchcraft damage. The estimated repair cost is 35 magic crystals. The cost has been added to your public bill." After the mechanical voice of the tower genie disappeared, the residents that had been eroded beyond recognition by the raging flames and scorching lava immediately began to change. The floor that had been eroded and full of potholes recovered with a slight bulge, while the steaming hot magma slowly disappeared from the field as if it had been erased by an invisible eraser. A moment later, the residence was restored to its original state. Grim sat down in front of his desk after sealing the defensive spells in his residence, silently communicating with the AI chip. "AI chip, did you record what happened just now? Did you discover anything strange?" "Beep. Host has suffered from an illusory attack. The source of the attack is an unknown, mysterious rune." Illusory attack? Grim couldn't help but mutter to himself. How did the recovery rune he expected turn into a mutated illusory rune? The difference between the two was too great. Did the AI chip deduce wrongly? Or was there something strange about those runes from another world that he could not understand? Thinking about it carefully, the experience just now was too realistic. Now that he closed his eyes, the strange hand that seemed to have no bones and the abnormally nimble eyes appeared in his mind. Such a scene was just an illusion. In the last scene, the strange eyeball had attacked him. If he had not resisted, would he not have suffered any damage? Although there was a trace of doubt, Grimm shook his head and denied this dangerous thought. No, he definitely could not make such a dangerous attempt. In this world, illusory spells were a powerful force, and as long as it was a force, there would be a certain degree of danger. Hence, even if he was sure that it was an illusory spell, he still had to defend against it. After thinking about it, Grimm felt that he had only been a magus for a short period of time, and the resources he had in store were too insufficient. He had almost zero methods to defend against illusory spells and spiritual force spells, and he had to rely on his spiritual force to resist them. This was not in line with the nature of a magus who was good at using knowledge and resources. As for the special items like the shrieking twig that he had obtained as an acolyte, they were no longer suitable for him at the magus rank. If Grimm wanted to obtain some magic artifacts or equipment that could be used by magi, he could only place his hopes on Sky City. After all, in the entire Magus continent, Sky City, with its large number of arcane magi, was definitely the first among the three great Magus organizations in terms of the quantity and quality of high-grade magic artifacts. Even some of the powerful enchanted items that had appeared in the Scattered Tower Forest were mostly from Sky City. It seemed that before he could gather magic equipment that could increase spiritual force resistance, he would have to stop his research on these runes from another world for a period of time. While Grimm was silently thinking about the direction of his research, a familiar spiritual wave came from the defensive spell of his residence. Grimm did not hesitate to connect to Kogan through the spiritual link. Come to the 12th floor, Lady Sinazar is back. Grimm's heart skipped a beat. Lady Sinazar was a genuine rank 3 bloodline magus, and her true form was a super terrifying venomous wyvern. Back in the plain battlefield, Grimm had personally witnessed her display of power and how she had forced the green dragons to flee in panic. The return of such a powerful magus meant that the conquest of the Night's Plane was going smoothly. That was why the family had the spare energy to send her back to suppress the situation. Grimm did not dare to delay. He rushed out of his residence on the 7th floor and hurried to the 12th floor to meet with the head of the family. Sinazar was a rank 3 female magus, but her face was always shrouded in a strange green mist, making it difficult for people to see her face. When she sat high up on a thick stone chair and stared coldly at the crowd, all the magi could not help but lower their heads, not daring to look directly at her body. Even if they were standing slightly closer, they could feel a slight pain coming from their bodies from time to time. This was the energy radiation caused by Lady Sinazar's overly strong magic power. As long as she did not take the initiative to restrain her power, the group of rank 1 magi could only silently endure, and no one dared to show any dissatisfaction. If a terrifying rank 6 magus was compared to a small nuclear reactor, then a rank 3 magus like Sinazar would be a nuclear material with extremely strong radiation, while rank 1 magi like Grimm would at most be some nuclear waste. Therefore, even though magi were already as powerful as gods in front of ordinary people, when faced with a high-ranked magus whose strength was even more unfathomable, they would once again feel fear and trepidation that they had not felt for a long time. At this moment, there were only 3 magi in the Wizard Tower, including Grimm. Even if you added the 3 magi stationed outside, the total number of magi in the Salubo family's headquarters was only 6. This number was indeed a little weak for an intermediate magus family. From this, it could be seen that the death of 8 magi in the Night's Plane had significantly weakened the Salubo family's power. Perhaps this was also the main reason why the great wizard Salubo was so anxious to send Sinazar, a rank 3 magus, back to the base of the family. After all, the wizard world was the source of all wizard families. Only by keeping their roots large and smooth could they continuously send qualified magi to all the big secondary planes, making the whole family prosperous and powerful. Wizard Senazar lazily leaned on the stone chair, silently listening to Wizard Kogan's explanation of the recent changes in the family and the movements of the surrounding wizard families. When she heard that Grimm had fought against 2 magi and killed a wizard from the Black Hand Association 7 days ago, her gaze finally landed on Grimm through the hazy green mist. For no reason, Grimm felt his body tighten, and the piercing pain became even clearer. After a long period of silence, Grimm finally heard the voice of Miss Senazar. "Before I came back, I heard Mr. Salubo mention you. He said that you're the most intelligent and ambitious one among the rank 1 magi in the family. That's good. If a wizard loses his ambition, he will also lose the courage to explore and take risks. But if he only has ambition and no brains, he will take risks and be reckless, and he will die in a situation that is beyond his ability." After that, Senazar turned her head to Kogan and ordered, "Send a message to that old bastard from the Black Hand Association. Tell him that I, Senazar, am back. If he dares to do anything to the Salubo family again, I will go to their door and eat them all." The fierceness and cruelty in her words sent chills down Grimm's spine. Also, Grimm had a feeling that if she said that she wanted to eat Kogan, it was not a threat. Instead, it was something that she couldn't wait to do. Also, the family is in urgent need of new people, so you guys can't just sit around. From today onwards, every wizard in the family must accept a few wizard followers and be responsible for their education. The family will give you double the contribution points. Actually, this was what everyone had already thought of. Therefore, no one had any objections and nodded in agreement. Chapter 261. South Feldman City, Wizard Tower. Grimm met the 5 apprentices assigned to him in his residence. 2 prospective wizards and 3 advanced apprentices were very young. Basically, anyone who could become a prospective wizard or advanced apprentice before the age of 50 had the potential to become a wizard. Wizard families were willing to spend a lot of money to nurture them. As for those apprentices who could barely raise their mental force to advanced wizard, they knew they had no hope of becoming a wizard. They had long since given up on this path and went to the mortal world to enjoy the offerings of the local nobles. Among the quasi-sorcerers and senior apprentices assigned to Grimm, there was 1 woman each. She was quite pretty. However, with Grimm's elemental sight, he could easily see the faint fluorescence left behind by the transformation spell on their faces. It was obvious that the 5 apprentices had heard of Grimm's terrifying reputation as a fire demon. They all stood obediently in front of him, not even daring to breathe loudly. However, one could tell from the glint in their eyes that they were very satisfied with being able to become fire demon's apprentices. They could not hide their excitement. For some unknown reason, even Alice, who had always done things her own way, came to this meet and greet. She stood beside Grimm with her hands on her hips, looking at the 2 female apprentices with malicious intent. Her eyes rolled around as if she was plotting something. "This is the first time we've met. Tell me your names and research direction," Grimm said slowly. After hearing their mentor's request, the 5 apprentices looked at each other. It was the skinnier prospective wizard who stood up first. "Kodar, innate affinity, dark element. I became a prospective wizard last year. My main research is mutation, and I've dabbled in beastification. Meryl, innate affinity, earth element. I became a prospective wizard this year. I'm planning to become an elemental wizard. I don't have any part-time jobs. AM, innate affinity, fire element, advanced apprentice. I'm handling magic materials. Toli, innate affinity, illusion element, advanced apprentice. I'm a potion master. Lena, innate affinity, water element, advanced apprentice. I don't have any part-time jobs." Grimm listened without batting an eyelid, a blue light flashing in the depths of his eyes. With his elemental sight, he had already captured every single detail of the acolyte's physiques and spiritual force. Asking them to introduce themselves was purely for the convenience of building a file for them and completing their personal information. With the help of the AI chip's terrifying information-gathering ability, Grimm received further prompts from the AI chip as soon as the 5 acolytes introduced themselves. Of the 5 apprentices, XXX had the potential to continue improving. XXX's potential had been exhausted, and he could only reach this stage by relying on the help of potions. XXX had the outstanding aptitude to develop in a certain direction, although he had already divided them in his heart. Grimm's young and handsome face didn't reveal any of it. Since you're all under my name, from today onwards, you're all apprentices under me, Grimm. As long as anyone performs well, I will take them in as a true disciple. At this point, Grimm looked around and saw the excitement in many of their eyes. Also, this is Alice. She's my personal maid and also your senior apprentice. If you have any problems in the future, you can ask her for help. Hearing Grimm's words, Alice immediately puffed out her chest and folded her belly, looking like she was the big sister. The acolytes looked at each other and bowed to Alice at the same time. The 2 young would-be magi seemed a little reluctant. In Omega's continent, there was a world of difference between an acolyte and a disciple. The status of an acolyte only showed that you had studied under a master. When necessary, you could rely on your status as an acolyte to obtain the master's protection. However, the status of a disciple was completely different. It was more like a magic contract, and both parties would have a more intimate and clear relationship of knowledge inheritance. Sometimes, if a magus were to die in an accident, his disciple would have the right to inherit all of his assets. Therefore, most magi did not want to cause more trouble for themselves. As such, they often had a large number of apprentices, but there were very few true disciples, or even none at all. According to the tradition of the Salubo family, you have become my acolytes and have the right to obtain free knowledge from me. Every 7 days, you'll have a chance to ask a question for free. High-ranked acolytes can ask 1 question, while would-be magi can ask 2. In addition, I've also dabbled in elemental puppetry, biology, anatomy, neurology, and the basics of potions. If any of you are willing to be my collaborator, I can share the results of my research with you, and you can also use my lab for free. Grimm said expressionlessly. Hearing his words, the acolytes could not help but look hesitant. Although they were the most precious treasures of the Salubo family, not everyone dared to cooperate with the magi in experiments. Most magi's experiments involved forbidden subjects, and the risks involved were self-evident. Although the participating acolytes could share the results of magi's experiments, the damage to their bodies and minds was unknown. Under normal circumstances, acolytes who were confident in their future would not choose this path. Only those who had exhausted their potential or were short of money would choose to take a gamble to gain their mentor's attention and favor. The would-be magus called Kodar could not help but bow and ask, "Respected mentor, may I know what the experiment you mentioned involves?" "It's related to illusions." The acolytes could not help but look at the high-ranked acolyte, Tori. He was the only one who had an affinity with illusions, so he was obviously more suitable to be the so-called collaborator. Feeling everyone's scorching but invisible pressure, Tali braced himself and took a step forward. He bowed and said, "Sir Mentor, I'm willing to participate in your illusion experiment." "Oh!" A gentle smile appeared on Grimm's face. "Are you willing to be my collaborator?" "Yes." Tori squeezed out a smile that was uglier than crying. "It's my honor to be able to participate in your experiment." "Very well, then let's sign a magic contract." Grimm nodded in satisfaction. With a wave of his hand, a magic contract scroll made of pure flames appeared out of thin air and slowly floated in front of Tori. Tori rubbed his eyes and carefully read all the terms in the scroll. He found that the content was exactly the same as what Mentor Grimm had said, so he carefully left his own magic imprint on it. With a soft, crackling sound, the magic contract scroll turned into a ball of flames and disappeared into the air. "If there's nothing else, you can all leave. Tori, get ready. Come here at 7 tonight." Grimm was obviously in a good mood after getting an experimental subject as expected. The smile on his face was a little wider than usual. The acolytes bowed at the same time and slowly left. Alice rolled her eyes and secretly followed them out. It wasn't until an hour later that Alice came back arrogantly, looking like a little fox who had stolen a hen's food. "How was it?" Grimm put down the book in his hand and asked lazily, "How many did you defeat?" "5. I beat all 5 of them to the ground," Alice said proudly and disdainfully. "With their strength, they can't even stand a chance against me." Grimm frowned. "You didn't hurt Tolly, did you?" "Of course not." Alice had been in a good mood ever since she got the Void Stone from Grimm. "I know he has a mission tonight, so I just trapped him in the dimensional cage." Since he couldn't move, he admitted defeat. "What about them?" Grimm asked curiously. "I've beaten them into a pig's head. I'm going back to apply medicine." Alice clenched her small fists, looking like a violent queen. Grimm tilted his head and thought for a moment. He could totally imagine the helplessness everyone felt when facing the indestructible space barrier. To be honest, if it wasn't for the suppression of the powerful magic puppet, it would have been a dream for Grimm to suppress Alice with just his innate fire element. With her heaven-defying spatial talent, Alice possessed attack power, defense power, and mobility that ordinary people couldn't even imagine. With these 3 points, a normal quasi-sorcerer would not be able to move Alice even if he wanted to, nor would he be able to run away. Anyone who fought Alice would end up in a state where they wanted to cry, but the heavens wouldn't be able to help them. At night, Tori, a high-ranking apprentice, arrived at Grimm's residence. The experiment that Grimm had given him was very simple. It was a knowledge crystal used to store mental strength, and there were 10 extremely special witchcraft runes hidden inside. What Tolly needed to do was to write them down one by one and record the changes in his body and mental strength before and after each rune was written down. For this, Grimm had specially set up a secret room for Tolly to complete this seemingly simple task. Of course, Grimm had secretly placed many surveillance crystals in every corner of the secret room, so he could clearly transmit Tolly's every move to Grimm, who was in the adjacent secret room. To encourage this senior apprentice who had been chosen as a guinea pig, Grimm promised to give him 3 books related to potioneering for free. Chapter 262. The experiment went very smoothly. It was so smooth that it far exceeded Grimm's expectations. When Tori staggered out of the secret room with a stack of parchments, apart from his pale face and dazed expression, he did not seem to have suffered any injuries. Grimm took out the 3 books he had promised and sent him away. He then began to examine the parchments in detail. As expected, 2 out of the 10 parchments that were supposed to have runes drawn on them were completely blank. Tori did not seem to notice this at all. Grimm pondered for a moment. First, he collected the 8 verified runes and tried them out one by one. He successfully obtained 8 completely new runes that had never appeared in the Magus rune system before. With these 8 runes, tonight's experiment was not a complete failure. At the very least, he had gained something, right? However, Grimm was extremely curious about the 2 runes that had disappeared for no reason. He vaguely felt that the direction of his research had gone astray. To be honest, the new runes that the AI chip had successfully derived were all auxiliary runes. Not a single one of the key runes that played a leading role in the fusion of rune energy had been successfully derived. It was as if these runes were hiding some deep mysteries that he did not understand. What were runes? In the end, they were just a manifestation of the laws of the plane. The earliest records of the origin of runes originated from the research of magic runes. Although some powerful monsters did not know any knowledge or principles, they could successfully use extraordinary powers. On their bodies, magic runes would naturally form. Magi were originally a group of mortals. It was only when they were fighting against the monsters that they noticed the existence of magic runes and began to secretly learn them. First, they used a method of copying these magic runes onto their bodies, giving them special, extraordinary powers. After tasting the benefits, Magi continuously collected magic runes, accumulated them, and began to simplify and modify them. Hence, after tens of thousands of years of fumbling in the dark, they created the Magus runes of today, which indirectly led to the development of the Magi community. In all seriousness, the study of runes was the one that was closest to the origin of the laws of the plane. As for the runes that came from the Knight's Plane, the core runes that occupied a dominant position couldn't be analyzed for a long time. Even simple writing on them couldn't be achieved. This was enough to expose that the core runes production must have a secret that he was not aware of. What would that be? A group of inferior natives from a secondary plane who hadn't even established a complete casting system. How much advanced rune knowledge could they have researched? Wait a minute, Grimm made a sudden move. It seemed that the Knight's Plane wasn't just filled with low-level creatures. There were also some high-level creatures from the outside, such as green dragons. Grimm's eyes lit up. He felt like he had discovered something. He had brought back a large number of rare materials and historical records from the crafting camp of the Kingdom of Knights. However, he had focused all his attention on the content related to runes and had never paid attention to the history of the formation of the Kingdom of Knights. Now that he had discovered his oversight, Grimm immediately corrected himself and spent the entire night combing through the so-called history of the Kingdom of Knights. As expected, in the history of the Kingdom of Knights, Grimm discovered some secrets hidden behind the history. The appearance of the Demon Hunter Knight was something that happened after the Green Dragons became the protectors of the Kingdom of Knights. High-ranked Demon Hunter Knights also seemed to have some sort of relationship with the dragons. This gave Grimm sufficient reason to suspect that the origin of these runes was not the natives of the Knight's Plane, but the dragons from the Dragon's Plane. Suddenly understanding this, Grimm immediately used his authority as a magus to move all the books and information about the dragons back to his residence. Although it was tiring to study day and night, it also helped him to greatly supplement the database related to the giant dragons. Magi naturally had a thorough understanding of the dragons, as they were a powerful race that ran amok in various material planes. Hence, after adding in this information, the AI chip's analysis of the runes from the other world proceeded abnormally smoothly. Almost every day, the AI chip would be able to derive new runes from these runes. Some of these runes had value, while others were completely useless. The specific verification work was left to Tolly. As expected of a high-ranked acolyte with an affinity for illusions, Tolly had an extraordinary talent in terms of resistance to illusions. Although the fragmented illusions of the runes often caused him to feel dizzy, and there were even a few times when his consciousness was almost sucked into the illusions, he managed to break through them one by one. The large number of books and many free resources that Grimm had provided allowed Tolly to avoid the pain of running around to find resources. He could finally conduct his own research in the Magus Tower with peace of mind. However, he had to pay the price of 4 to 5 new runes every day. Since he was Wizard Grimm's collaborator, he could see Grimm almost every day, so he was no longer limited by the number of questions he could ask. In terms of treatment, Tolly's status was almost equal to that of a Magus disciple. This seemed to be the main reason why he was willing to take the risk to stay. As for Alice, she quickly became the leader of the acolytes under Grimm. After she led them to fight a few battles with other acolytes, she quickly became the tyrant of the Magus Tower in Ferdinand City. With Alice's terrifying innate talent in space, only official Magi could suppress her. Other acolytes, even powerful quasi-Magi, would find it difficult to suppress her. Alice, on the other hand, was undoubtedly one of the strongest quasi-Magi. Cabby, who had relied on Grimm's protection to successfully become a goblin merchant, became more and more close to Grimm when the name of the fire demon became more and more famous. The Magus world was also a world where the strong preyed on the weak. Most businesses, such as trading companies and secret spell huts, were controlled by Magus families and factions of all sizes. As a lone outsider, Cabby wanted to make a living in their bowls, so he would naturally be bullied and ostracized. Therefore, Cabby's goblin shop only dared to operate in Ferdinand City. Once he stepped out of this area, his little business and tricks would be swallowed up by others in the same industry. And now, as Grimm's status in the Salubo family rose day by day, Cabby began to curry favor with Alice and Grimm's apprentices. Grimm's apprentices enjoyed the cheap resources provided by Kirby, and Kirby had indirectly gathered a large number of bodyguards and thugs for himself. Thus, both sides mutually benefited from each other and formed a small circle, a small group that benefited from each other. However, Grimm didn't care about all of this and allowed them to combine and grow stronger. As for himself, he focused all of his attention on the process of analyzing and verifying the runes. After 2 months, Grimm had successfully deciphered 6 of the 28 new runes. It sounded like a small number, but it was enough for him to expand his knowledge of rune energy fusion to the level of a Grade 2 Radiant Knight. This also indicated that Grimm had completely grasped the mysteries of the runes of a Grade 2 Radiant Knight. He could now create a powerful rune knight himself. However, the strength of a Grade 2 Radiant Knight lay in their own bodies. The rune energy system only played a supporting role. Therefore, even if Grimm could create a Grade 2 rune equipment, he would not be able to unleash powerful attacks without sufficient strength to activate it. However, it seemed that Grimm had quite a number of Grade 2 resources in his possession. The Grade 2 Molten Giant's Core from the Lava Sea, the Grade 2 Balrog's Heart from Lord Salubo, and the remains of a Radiant Knight killed in the Night Plane. It was a pity that Grimm was not a professional necromancer. Otherwise, he would be able to create some powerful undead with ease. With this knowledge of runes, Grimm became busier and busier. The resources he purchased from Cabby were already in place, and the processing of the Balrog's Heart was progressing quickly. There were still 4 Magi elemental crystal cores and a Grade 2 Molten Giant's Core waiting for him to process them one by one. Upgrading his Balrog transformation tattoo with his new knowledge of runes was also a top priority. Even when he had free time, Grimm still had to design and create a rune equipment that suited his abilities and talents. With all these things, Grimm's time was packed to the brim. He could not find any free time at all. Unfortunately, the 4 Magi elemental crystal cores he used for practice failed twice. In the end, Grimm only obtained 2 magic kryptonite cores. One was the rotting ones, and the other was the roaring ones. The rotting ones were Magi kryptonites made from toxic elemental crystal cores. They looked like a slime monster covered in sticky green liquid. They had special abilities such as acid sputtering, poisonous aura, and splitting and multiplying. The acid they spat out was extremely corrosive and poisonous, and could effectively erode the opponent's defenses. Its ability to divide and multiply allowed it to split itself into 2 smaller rotted ones when it suffered enough damage, thus forming a more ferocious firepower. Currently, the rotting ones could split and multiply 3 times. This meant that once he released the rotting ones, after a long battle, Grimm would be able to obtain 8 Magi firepower turrets. As for the Roarers, which were made from the Earth Elemental Crystal Core, it looked like a 5-meter-tall, giant stone man. Its special abilities included Earth Tremor, Boulder Throw, Rock Armor, etc. To be honest, in order to maximize the destructive power of his fire innate talent, Grimm especially liked these kryptonites with strong defenses. Chapter 263. The days passed one after another. The resources that Grimm had accumulated during this period also disappeared from the assembly line and were gradually converted into his strength. After the 2 wizard-ranked mana puppets, the Tier 2 Molten Giant's Core was successfully transformed into a terrifying elemental mana puppet, the Inferno Tyrant. Of course, Grimm's abilities were limited. The Inferno Tyrant definitely could not reach the level of a Tier 2 Magus. However, the earth and fire elemental energy that it could activate with a wave of its hand was terrifying enough to crush a Tier 1 Magus. Through Grimm's chip's detailed analysis, the Inferno Tyrant's normal attacks could reach a frightening 110 degrees. It was second only to Grimm's strongest single-target attack spell. The earth and fire elemental spells that the Inferno Tyrant could activate had an attack strength of 191 degrees. This was already close to the lower limit of a Tier 2 Magus. Among the sorcerers, Most Tier 1 official sorcerers have between 90 and 130 degrees of defense. This also meant that if the Inferno Tyrant's strongest spell was not dodged or neutralized, it would have the power to instantly kill an ordinary magus. With the birth of the Inferno Tyrant, Grimm's frustration at losing the Lord of the Flames was swept away. He straightened his back once more, full of confidence in his trip to Sky City. Inside the Magus Tower, Grimm's room had undergone earth-shattering remodeling. It was no longer the same as before, but more like an operating room. All the furniture had been cleared out, leaving only a clean and tidy stone table in the middle of the room. Dozens of complicated and sophisticated mechanical arms were suspended above the stone table. At the end of each arm were surgical instruments of different styles and uses. Scalpels, surgical scissors, vascular forceps, surgical forceps, needle holders, tissue forceps, sponge forceps, right-angle forceps, circular needles, triangular needles, bone forceps, and so on. There were all sorts of instruments, including knives, hammers, drills, chisels, needles, saws, and so on. These were all borrowed by Grimm from Wizard Kogan. Their original purpose was to transform wizard beasts. Today was the big day for the Balrog's heart transplant. Grimm had called Alice over early and asked her to lead a group of apprentices to guard the door for him. On the other hand, he hid in his house and completed the arduous and complicated organ transplant alone. In order to prevent anyone from messing with the process, Grimm did not use the Wizard Tower's laboratory, nor did he ask Wizard Kogan for help. Even the reason for summoning the apprentices here was a dangerous spell experiment, and he did not reveal the heart of the Balrog to the outside world. After staying in the sorcerer world for so long, Grimm's only way to protect himself was to be cautious. In this strange world, the only person he could trust was Mary. As for Alice and KB, it would depend on their behavior and attitude in the future. After a dark and sweet sleep, the A.I. Chip's alarm sounded in his mind. Only then did Grimm wake up from his deep sleep and slowly open his eyes. He slept soundly and relaxed like never before. Grimm didn't dream or meditate. He just let go of everything and had a good sleep, completely recovering from the fatigue and exhaustion of the past few days. Grimm stretched his back and sat up on the bed. He stood in front of the bed and did some simple exercises until the A.I. Chip completed the autopsy of his body. Beep. Self-examination completed. All data is normal. Body has reached its peak state. Grimm nodded in satisfaction and looked down at his tall and beautiful body. Grimm was not a body refiner, so he did not have the abnormal muscles that were as hard as iron. However, with a height of 2 meters, his well-proportioned and well-built body still bestowed him with an almost perfect body. His sturdy muscles, dark red and lustrous skin, and the strange tattoos on his chest and back. His dark red hair was scattered behind his back, almost reaching his waist. Coupled with the dark red glow in his black eyes, Grimm's entire body emitted a trace of evil, mysterious, and wise wizard aura. Ever since he completed the elemental transformation of his body of fire, dark red had become his standard color. This was also the glow of a large amount of fire elemental energy. Normal camouflage spells would not be able to cover it up. Although there wasn't any ash on his body, Grimm still took a bath in the fire out of habit. Suddenly, elemental flames sprayed out from every pore on his body, forming a layer of bright red flame film on the surface of his body, and all the dirt on his body was completely incinerated by this layer of flame, not leaving a single trace behind. As for the ordinary sleeping robe that did not have any defensive spells, it instantly turned into ashes and disappeared without a trace. Grimm did not wear any more clothes and just walked out of the bedroom naked. He went straight to the operation room that had been converted from workshop. Grimm closed his eyes and checked the defensive spells in the room. He confirmed that all the defensive spells had been activated and that the place was impenetrable. He then calmly laid down on the cold stone platform. There was a metal headband that looked like a hood on one side of the stone platform. Grimm silently put on his head. When his spiritual force penetrated the metal headband, the dozens of mechanical arms floating above the stone platform were immediately activated and began to move. Grimm snapped his fingers, and 5 extremely clear, flaming mirrors appeared at various angles above the stone platform. Through them, Grimm could observe the part of his body that was about to be operated on from all angles. The fluorescence in the surrounding walls gradually dissipated, and the surroundings were shrouded in darkness. Dozens of illumination crystals projected a bright and gentle light, illuminating the surroundings of the operation table. At this moment, Grimm's expression was strangely calm. AI chip begin. With this command, the AI chip immediately took over all the magic arms. A cold light flashed in the air, and a magic arm floated in front of Grimm's chest. The sharp scalpel at the front of the instrument pierced into his chest, and a piercing sound could be heard as it cut open his flesh. The swiftness of his movements and the accuracy of his movements simply left everyone speechless and gasping in admiration. If it was Grimm who was controlling it, he would not have been able to do it so decisively. Perhaps it was due to Grimm's special constitution, or because the scalpel did not damage any large blood vessels, but there was no spurt of blood. With Grimm's current vitality of 3.7, even without any spells, his skin and flesh were as tough as an iron-plated rhinoceros. Hence, it would be difficult to cut open Grimm's skin with ordinary weapons. And the magic tools used for surgery today were obviously enchanted. After the operation was completed, the scalpel was immediately moved away. 2 magic arms with humanoid hands flew to Grimm's side and gently opened up his chest. What appeared in front of Grimm was a human heart protected by thick ribs and sternum. Although the heart had undergone some changes due to being immersed in dense fire elemental energy for a long time, its basic form and functions were not much different from a human heart. Grimm looked on calmly, not interfering with the AI chip's control. Although he was the true owner of this body, he could not be as merciless and precise as the AI chip when it came to intricate internal surgery. As a few flywheels and knives flew towards Grimm, the ear-piercing sound of bones being cut rang out from his chest. Without the enchantment of his sharpness and sturdiness, these magic arms would not have been able to damage Grimm's bones and flesh, which were protected by powerful wizard force. The vibrations of the metal flywheels cutting through his bones and the intense pain of his flesh being torn apart were transmitted to Grimm's soul. He could only endure it silently. He had to open his eyes wide, taking in every single detail so that the AI chip could perform more precise operations and control. As the ribs were cut off one by one, Grimm's heart was finally exposed. The flywheels and knives were moved away, and more magic arms swarmed over. They began to cut off the blood vessels connecting the heart to the other organs. Every time a blood vessel was cut off, a tiny ray of heat would enter and temporarily seal it. Grimm began to control his body at the same time. He tightened the blood vessels all over his body, slowing down the flow of blood. This would prevent a large amount of bleeding in his chest. In the darkness, a dark red light shone. The Balrog's heart, which had been carefully processed, was lifted up by a tray and slowly floated to the front of the operating table. A magic arm carefully picked it up and floated beside Grimm's chest, waiting. Grimm's gaze quickly swept across the Balrog's heart, and he saw densely packed strange runes in the dark red tendons and flesh. These runes, the size of sesame seeds, covered the inside and outside of the Balrog's heart, forming a complicated and mysterious rune formation. With a burst of pain, the last artery connecting the heart to the heart was cut off, and the slowly wriggling heart was lifted out by the magic arm. There was no time to hesitate at all. The new Balrog's heart was immediately stuffed into Grimm's chest. Countless slender arms reached into it and used unimaginable witchcraft to quickly connect the blood vessels. The entire process was complicated, but not chaotic. More than 10 magic arms rose and fell, and all sorts of strange noises could be heard after advancing to become a magus. Grimm's vitality far surpassed that of ordinary people. Coupled with his elemental body, even if his heart was removed, it would not cause him to die immediately. However, this heart transplant surgery could not be carried out for too long. Otherwise, his body would be affected, and his basic vitality would be lowered. To be honest, due to the effects of his elemental body, the body strengthening methods that were suitable for body-tempering magi were no longer effective on him. Hence, once his vitality was lowered, it would be extremely difficult to raise it again. Ever since Grimm learned how to use the Balrog's transformation, he would find it extremely difficult to let Grimm return to the soft, wandering style of an elemental magus. Chapter 264. Thump. As the new Balrog's heart completed its first beat in his chest, Grimm felt a scorching hot current surging through his body. The feeling of being filled to the brim made him groan in discomfort. Although the Balrog's heart's power had been mostly sealed by the runes, the powerful strength of a Grade 2 abyssal demon was still too much for Grimm to bear. Powerful strength had to be borne by a powerful body. The abyssal Balrogs in the lower realm were usually more than 4 meters tall. Their physiques were so tough that they could even stand shoulder to shoulder with dragons. Although they still had a body of flesh and blood, their blood vessels were filled with scorching hot magma, and their bodies were filled with violent and evil flames. After suddenly transplanting the magical organ of such a powerful creature into Grimm's body, apart from the unbearable power of flames, he also received the violent and cruel aura of an abyssal Balrog. If Grimm's body had not completed its elemental conversion, he would have been burned to ashes after the first beat of the Balrog's heart. But now, even though the Balrog's heart had merged with his body, Grimm still felt uncomfortable all over. It was as if his blood was slowly heating up and burning his body bit by bit. Fortunately, the sealed Balrog's heart only beat twice per minute, which prevented Grimm from being burned to death by his uncontrollable flames. This was actually a short-term discomfort caused by the Balrog's heart not reaching a new balance with his body. As long as he recuperated and adapted for a period of time, a new life cycle would definitely be established. At that time, under the influence of the powerful Balrog's heart, Grimm's physique might even grow further, gradually approaching the path of a berserk wizard. Grimm endured the pain and slowly sat up, moving his body off the operating table. He looked down and saw that the terrifying wound on his chest had been sealed by the scorching rays, leaving behind an ugly centipede-like scar. With his physique, it would only take him half a day to completely heal such a huge wound. However, the prerequisite was that he had to eat a lot. After swaying a few times, Grimm finally managed to stand up on the floor. His body was clearly surging with overflowing power, but his body could not help but feel weak. These two contradictory feelings constantly clashed and intensified in Grimm's mind, torturing him to the point where he could not stop frowning. Grimm made a grabbing motion in the air, and pieces of magic equipment flew out from the darkness, fully equipping him once again. Since the design of the rune equipment had not been completed yet, Grimm was still wearing a light robe commonly seen by elemental wizards. Some of the more orthodox wizards like to wear tall, pointy wizard hats, but Grimm had no interest in this kind of old-fashioned clothing. With the emergence of a large number of magic equipment, powerful magic artifacts also emerged one after another. The old-fashioned wizard robes, wizard hats, and flying brooms that were only enchanted with a few spells were rarely used anymore. Only in the more traditional and conservative ancient organizations, there was still a large number of old people who refused to use new things. But Grimm didn't have this problem. He was a typical pragmatist, only considering the power and effects of any equipment, never considering whether it was new or old. With a casual wave of his hand, a surging wave of flames gently swept across the entire room, completely erasing all traces of blood and aura. Even some of the broken bones were incinerated into ashes, not leaving any chance for the enemy to peek into his body. As for the heart that was removed, although Grimm wanted to keep it, he still destroyed it for safety's sake. After cleaning up the place, Grimm removed the defensive spell on the door. Hence, a group of quasi-sorcerers and high-level acolytes under his command swarmed in and very quickly cleared the stone platform and the magical equipment. Grimm didn't care about this at all. He asked the tower genie for a lot of magic set meals and started wolfing them down. Even now, the magic set meals that had greatly benefited him in the past were not very useful to him anymore. However, food that matched his attributes could still bring him great enjoyment. While he was enjoying the food like a tornado, the tower genie suddenly sent him a message. An Angus wizard from the Dark Crypt Wizard Tower was trying to contact him from a distance, asking if Grimm would accept his request. Angus? Wasn't this the Magus that had agreed to go to Sky City? Since he could find his way here, it seemed like he already had some information about him. Grimm, who originally wanted to go to Sky City for a tour, immediately nodded his head in agreement. A black crack slowly appeared in the air, and a strange plant that looked like a sunflower emerged from it. As a large amount of fluorescent light gathered on the surface of the sunflower, the shadow on it swayed and gradually revealed the appearance of a black-robed Magus. Looking at the face, it was the Magus Angus who had been in contact with Grimm for a long time. "It's nice to meet you again, Magus Grimm." A strange smile appeared on Angus' cold face. When he greeted Grimm, he emphasized the word Magus. After all, when he had signed the contract with him, Grimm was just an acolyte that he could do whatever he wanted. It had only been a year, but Grimm had already become an official Magus who had the same status as him. Therefore, Angus was no longer confident that Grimm would still abide by the contract. After all, a contract that was used to restrict acolytes was not that effective on an official Magus. As long as Grimm was willing to pay the necessary compensation, he could even ignore this contract. On the other hand, Wizard Angus could not risk offending an intermediate wizard family in the central region and force Grimm to fulfill the contract. Therefore, when Wizard Angus saw Grimm's imposing figure through the light screen and sensed the violent spiritual force fluctuations, he could not help but reveal a trace of nervousness and unease in his tone. "Nice to meet you, Wizard Angus." Grimm nodded his head as a polite response. "I wonder if you're still willing to abide by the contract we signed before?" Angus asked in a probing manner. "Of course," Grimm smiled. "I still have a lot of expectations for this trip to Sky City." After hearing Grimm's reply, Wizard Angus let out a sigh of relief. His original plan was to hire Grimm to participate in the Acolyte Puppeteer Tournament and keep his family's share of the profits. Now that Grimm had successfully become a wizard, if he won the Wizard Puppet Master competition, his family's income would be more than 10 times what it used to be. How could he not be nervous? However, in front of an official Magus who had the same status as him, any lies and deceit would be a despicable behavior. Therefore, Angus immediately expressed that he wanted to sign a new contract with Grimm and promised him a huge amount of benefits that could even move Grimm's heart. It could be seen that the benefits that Sky City had brought to the Byron family had already reached a staggering level. Otherwise, there was no way he would be willing to pay such a huge amount of money. There were still 3 months left until the start of the competition. Grimm only had 2 more months to prepare before he would be ready to depart. Both of them chatted for a while and agreed on a place to meet up. Only then did they cut off the long-distance spell connection. "Are you going to Sky City?" Alice had been staying beside him, so she had heard the conversation between Wizard Angus and Wizard Angus. What do you have in mind?" Grimm glared at her. Alice seemed to have figured out his temper. She knew that he was a master who did not care too much about hierarchy, so she even dared to listen in on the conversation between 2 wizards. "Then let's bring KB and me." Alice suddenly became excited. "Why?" "Because Sky City is the most prosperous place in the entire wizard continent. If your goblin subordinate really wants to realize his dream of becoming the greatest goblin merchant, Sky City is the place he must go. There are all kinds of new and interesting magic puppets, all kinds of strange wizard beasts, all kinds of rare monsters and materials, and countless arcane wizards. But none of these can compare to Sky City." Alice explained while waving her hands and feet. "Sky City is the greatest masterpiece of alchemy in the wizard world." After listening to Alice's aria, Grimm couldn't help but yawn and lightly said, "What does that have to do with you?" Alice's green eyes widened. She bared her canine teeth and said angrily, "How can I not go where Master wants to go? As your most adorable personal maid, how can I not go? Is there any doubt about this? Alice's eyes narrowed as she said the last sentence, and she did her best to look cute. It could be seen that Alice was really interested in this sky castle. In order to gain Grimm's approval, the usually arrogant Alice had become a little flattering. All right, let's go together. Grimm thought for a moment, then turned his head and said, Go tell KB about this. Tell him to get ready. If Sky City is really as good as you say, then do your best to make KB stay there. To establish one's own force, one must have an endless supply of resources and information. Leaving KB in Sky City was much better than staying in Fedina City. Chapter 265. 2 months later. Before dawn, the mist had yet to disperse. A black carriage slowly drove out of Fed South City amidst the rumbling. The tall buildings were quickly left behind. As the carriage moved forward, large amounts of farmland appeared on both sides of the road. In the depths of the mist, one could vaguely see the outlines of scattered farmhouses and small villages. Since the sun had not risen yet, there were not many people on the road that led to Feder City. Expensive carriages could be easily damaged when traveling in such weather, so there were not many people on the road, especially when they were more than 10 miles away from Feder City. The number of human buildings gradually decreased, and the tall trees grew denser and denser. Grimm lifted the curtain, and the moisture hit his face. There was a hint of coolness, but also a hint of coldness. Less than 10 miles out of the city, the trees on both sides of the road already had a hint of a primeval forest. This allowed him to imagine how, many years ago, humans, under the leadership of Magi, had struggled to carve out settlements in the primordial forest, and how difficult it had been for them to fight for land with the mutant creatures. In some early wizard notes and books, Grimm often saw wizards acting as the protectors of humans, assisting the nobles in governing their territories, repelling the attacks of terrifying monsters, and eliminating groups of ferocious beasts, making the human settlement safer. But that was a very long time ago. Over the past few thousand years, Grimm could clearly see how the wizards had surpassed the nobles of the human race. Step by step, they had risen above the entire race and dominated the entire wizard continent. The wizard continent had developed to this day, and the status of wizards and nobles had undergone earth-shattering changes. The former leaders of humans were now kneeling in front of wizards with great power, becoming their agents and slaves. Ordinary humans gradually left the wizard's sight, becoming a weak and lowly race in their eyes. If not for the strict rules set by high-grade wizards, wizards would not be allowed to use humans as experimental subjects, nor would they be allowed to kill ordinary mortals on a large scale. Otherwise, everything that mortals had would have been plundered by wizards, and they would have become lab rats or pitiful slaves who toiled until they died. Just as Grimm could not help but daydream, the driver could not help but turn his head. Master, this journey may be rather long. You should rest more. The driver was a middle-aged man with a simple and honest face. But under Grimm's powerful elemental sight, all he saw was Kobe hiding behind a camouflage spell and smiling obsequiously. Well, thank you for your hard work. Grimm nodded slightly and gently lowered the curtain. What hard work? Alice, who was curled up on one side of the carriage with sleepy eyes, yawned and said, This is what it should do. By the way, now that you're a powerful wizard, why don't you use your authority to rent a Socratic eagle? That way, we will only need 1 day to reach Emota City. Ferdinand City was the headquarters of the Salubo family. It was a private territory and was not within the route of the airship. Therefore, if they wanted to use the airship to get to the Silver Alliance's territory, they could only head to the public city of Mota City that was 300 miles away. In any case, we have plenty of time. It's not a bad idea to walk slowly and see the local customs of the scattered pagoda forest area, Grimm said with a faint smile. Alice rubbed her eyes and got up. She stared at Grimm seriously, as if she was looking at a monster. All right. Grimm seemed to know that his reason was too far-fetched and said helplessly, A few days ago, before we set off, the tower genie gave me a warning. It seemed to have sensed that someone was casting a prophecy spell on me. Prophecy? Alice suddenly became excited. You mean someone is trying to kill you? You're excited that we have an enemy? Of course. Otherwise the journey would be so boring. Have you ever thought that if the enemy dared to plot against me, they would definitely take everything into consideration? Aren't you afraid of dying in the hands of the enemy? Tis TSK. If you're not afraid, why should I be? Alice said with a face full of disdain. Since you already knew about the enemy, you would definitely have made the appropriate arrangements. Otherwise, with your personality, why would you be willing to use yourself to lure the enemy? At noon, the black carriage slowly drove into a gray road in the forest. The road was filled with pedestrians, merchants, and carriages, but at the moment, it was abnormally quiet. The carriages and ox carts were all stopped in place, and all the humans and ox horses that were pulling the carriages had fallen to the side and were snoring loudly. Seeing this, Goblin Cabby immediately reined in the two handsome white horses that were pulling the carriage. Before he could turn around to warn the carriage, a faint fragrance wafted into his nose. In the next second, Cabby and the two white horses that were pulling the carriage also fell to the ground. Grim opened the curtain and jumped off the carriage. He looked around at the strange scene and frowned. There was a bright red membrane floating on the surface of his tall and powerful body, and it was this membrane that prevented Grim from being attacked by the strange potion in the air. Grim's elemental vision could see clearly. As soon as he was exposed outside the carriage, the cold and humid air in the forest blew against his face, mixed with a transparent powder that hit the red membrane. There was a soft sound. Crimson flames appeared on the bright red membrane, incinerating all the powder that came at him. Inside the carriage, Alice, who was excited to watch a good show, was already snoring away on the carriage board. After all, a quasi-wizard like her could not resist the means of a wizard, even if she was the strongest quasi-wizard. 3 figures of different heights appeared on the right side of the forest. Their faces were hidden in thick cloaks, and they were silently watching Grim. Grim hesitated for a moment, but he did not try to wake Alice and Cabby up. Instead, he simply tidied up his equipment and silently followed the 3 mysterious wizards into the forest. After walking for a mile in the rustling forest, they arrived at an empty space in the forest. The forest here was sparse, and there was a pool about 200 meters in front of them. Looking around, other than tall trees and short, soft weeds, there was not a single person to be seen. It was a good place to settle the grudge. You know why we are here, right? One of the cloaked figures with his head slightly lowered asked in a low voice. From a voice, it should be a middle-aged man. The Black Hand Association? Grim's lips curled into a smile. The short, cloaked man took off his hood, revealing a wrinkled, shriveled, green face. Together with his hawk-like nose and messy, dirty, short green hair, he was not a human being. The president of the Black Hand Association, the only Grade 2 wizard, Green Dwarf Pyro. Being stared at by the other party's eerie green eyes, Grim felt as if a heavy boulder was pressing down on his heart. Even his breathing became uneven. Since you are the president of the Black Hand Association, aren't you afraid that Master Sinazar will come after you for killing an official wizard of the Salubo family? If the Black Hand Association attacked you, of course we can't afford Master Sinazar's wrath. But if it wasn't a member of the Black Hand Association, I'm afraid that Master Sinazar behind you wouldn't have gone against the laws of the Wizard Association of the Scattered Tower Forest and persecuted us. Green Dwarf Pyro said coldly. Sir, what do you mean? Lord Pyro's meaning is very simple. The skinniest and tallest of the 3 suddenly took off his cloak and revealed his face. With a sinister smile, he said, because the ones who attacked were not them, but us. The skinny man's face was pale, and his skin was wrinkled. His voice was low and hoarse. However, when he said the last sentence, his head suddenly turned 180 degrees, revealing the face of a woman. At the same time, the voice of him turned into a woman's voice. The woman's eyes were closed, and she had a strange smile on her face. Her speech was no different from that of a normal person. And she wasn't wearing a mask or a painted face, but a completely real woman. "The two-faced man, Kane," Grimm exclaimed. Although he had only been a magus for a short period of time, through this period of time, he had a comprehensive understanding of the famous magi in the scattered Tower Forest region and organized them. With the AI, Chip's high efficiency, he had a good idea of all the magi families, academies, organizations, and factions in the area, whether they were famous or not. As for Two-Faced Man Kane, Green Dwarf Pyro did not lie. He did not belong to the Black Hand Association, but was a powerful, wandering magus. Kane was born in an ordinary noble family in the central part of the continent. His twin sister and he were tested to have talent in becoming magi at a young age, so they were sent to a small magus academy to study. His experience was similar to Grimm's. They had met an extremely terrifying evil magus during their acolyte period. He and his twin sister had decent talent, and they had a special telepathic connection. As a result, they were chosen by an evil magus to do an extremely dangerous life fusion experiment. Hence, the outcome was obvious. The terrifying life fusion experiment had fused the souls of the siblings together. They shared a single body, but had two faces. The two of them had two souls in one body, and they took turns using the same body. With the sudden stimulation of their soul force, the siblings unexpectedly advanced to become magi. Due to the chaotic fusion of their souls, the two of them unexpectedly broke free from the control of that magus. The Two-Faced Kane and Lucy, who possessed the power of two sorcerers at the same time and were also able to communicate telepathically, immediately began a massacre. In one breath, they killed all the 4 sorcerers and 27 sorcerer apprentices of the small-sized sorcerer academy before escaping without a trace. Due to the chaos in his soul and the distortion of his personality, Two-Faced Man Kane had been wandering the central part of the continent, hiding from the Magus Association's disciplinary department. Most Magus families did not care about this matter, so they were unwilling to provoke such a powerful Magus. Hence, they had him and her go into hiding for a long time. Unexpectedly, the Black Hand Association was willing to pay a huge price to invite them out. Chapter 266. The leader of the Black Hand Association, Green Pyro, quickly retreated with another wizard, leaving the battlefield to the two of them. As long as the two of them did not participate in today's battle, even if Grimm was killed, the Cerubo family would not be able to use this as an excuse to seek revenge. Grimm hesitated for a moment. He put the wooden figurine in his hand back into his pocket, but he did not crush it. It was a magic amulet given to him by Master Sinazar. According to the agreement, as long as he crushed this wooden figurine within 100 miles of Felden City, she would be able to teleport over and kill him. However, the enemy in front of him had obviously expected this. The wizards of the Black Hand Association did not make a move. Instead, they had invited a powerful wandering wizard. If he had invited the tyrannical Lord Sinazar over, and there was no one for her to vent her anger on, Grimm would probably be punished. Moreover, even if the opponent was a famous two-faced wizard in the Central Continent, Grimm was confident that he would be able to defeat him. Moreover, his strength had greatly increased recently, and he wanted to test it out. While Grimm was thinking about making a decision, the two-faced wizard had already made his move. The first to make a move was the two-faced wizard's younger sister, Lucy. She was an expert in the rare sound wave spell. Her eyes were closed, and her mouth was wide open. She put her hands in front of her mouth and bent down to scream. The powerful sound waves even stirred up the transparent air, forming strange ripples in the void. The ripples quickly spread towards Grimm. There was no sound, or there was no sound at all. The wizard Lucy's death scream had obviously far exceeded the range of sound waves that ordinary people could hear. It had entered the terrifying field of ultrasound. Everything in front of Lucy shook and disintegrated the moment it came into contact with the sound waves. Tall trees were first broken into pieces of wood of different sizes, and then the pieces of wood were disintegrated into thumb-sized pieces. The pieces of wood were still shaking and then turned into splinters that were hard to be seen by the naked eye. The thousands of weeds on the ground trembled and were trampled by an invisible giant hand in the air, tearing them into pieces. The green juice contained terrifying kinetic energy, and it was like a bullet that pierced through everything in front of it. Grimm's lava shield was also severely tested by the terrifying sound waves. The lava shield had always been known for its excellent physical and elemental defense, but the moment it encountered the terrifying sound waves, the combination of hard lava and dark red magma became extremely fragile. With a series of crackling explosions, the lava on the surface of the shield cracked, and the dark red lava began to boil and self-destruct. There was a great danger that the shield would collapse upon contact. At the same time, the AI chip in Grimm's mind sounded frantically. Warning, warning. High-frequency ultrasonic waves have been detected. Please leave this high-frequency area immediately. Otherwise, your body will suffer severe shock damage. Damn it, the other party's sonic attack was actually a penetrative attack. The lava shield couldn't block it at all. Grimm endured the annoyance in his chest and threw a lava fireball at his opponent. Then, he used flame jump to leave the place. After all, the other party's sonic attack was a directional spell. As long as he avoided the front of his opponent, he would not be affected by the shock of the sound waves. Wizard Lucy, who was bending over, immediately increased the intensity of her shout. The lava fireball that was flying halfway actually exploded as the surface of the lava layer was damaged. When Grimm appeared 50 meters away from the left, the two-faced Wizard Lucy's head suddenly flipped, and in an instant, she had switched from Wizard Lucy to Wizard Kane. He, who had been silently chanting a spell behind her back, had actually guided a large-scale spell to its final stage. Hamid's Frozen Tide. As the last line of the spell was completed, Wizard Kane crossed his arms, and a large amount of blue ice crystals mixed with the chilly wind flew towards Grimm. His lava shield had already been destroyed, and he had just used his only mobile spell. Grimm's expression tightened, and he could only take a step back. He waved the flame scepter in his right hand. As the tip of the flame scepter flashed, a tall fire djinn appeared in front of him, blocking the incoming frozen tide. This was a quasi-wizard level fire djinn that had helped Grimm deal with many powerful enemies. Now, it was hard for him to hold on. Even if it did its best to push out a thick pillar of fire from its hands, it still could not block the attack of the chilly wind and the ice crystals. In a moment, this 5 meters tall fire djinn was frozen in a block of ice crystals by the horrifying power of ice. It was still trying its best to resist. After a few seconds, the ice crystals cracked, and the fire djinn also disintegrated into ice shards on the ground. Poor fire djinn. This time, it didn't even have the chance to self-destruct. Taking advantage of the short time that the fire djinn had bought for him, Grimm quickly flipped through the secret poison scroll in his hand. Soon, a fire core explosion was launched towards the fire djinn. However, before this red light, which represented Grimm's most powerful single-target spell, could reach the fire core explosion, it was once again broken by Lucy, who had switched back to her female face. Facing the berserk ice spears, Grimm could only use Flame Leap to dodge the attack. In the following battles, Grimm used Flame Leap to get close to the two-faced wizard several times. He wanted to use the fiercest instant spell to disrupt the wizard's rhythm, but he was always forced back by the wizard. After trying a few times, Grimm had to admit that there really were wizards in this world that specialized in restraining him. Grimm specialized in fire magic, so his fire magic was naturally more powerful than other wizards. However, the two-faced wizard's brother, Kane, specialized in ice magic, which was Grimm's nemesis. His sister, Lucy, specialized in sound wave attacks, which had natural penetrative and defensive properties. Therefore, even if Grimm transformed into a Balrog with thick skin and strong blood, it would still be difficult for him to defend against it. Moreover, the siblings' minds were connected. When one of them was controlling the body to fight Grimm, the other could hide behind him and silently cast spells. When the large-scale spells reached the final stage, the siblings would switch roles and use violent and ferocious spells to catch Grim off guard. Relying on the advantage of having two souls in one body, the two-faced wizard pressed forward, making it difficult for Grim to keep his footing. Grim had no choice but to jump around the battlefield, trying to find the enemy's weak points. It could be said that Grim had never been in such a difficult situation, even when he had to fight against two enemies outside Rockall Castle. Facing the ferocious enemy, Grim quickly moved around, using instant lava fireballs to fight back while listening to the AI chip strategic assessment in his mind. Beep. Enemy intelligence has been collected. After comparing and analyzing the data, the host's chances of winning are estimated to be 34%. What if I send the rotting ones? Chances of winning increased to 41%. And the roaring ones? Chances of winning increased to 53%. Grim secretly wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. Even if he sent out the two Magus rank magic puppets that represented his regular battle strength, his chances of winning were only slightly more than 50%. This made him, who had been so smug just a few days ago, fantasizing about sweeping away all opponents of the same rank, feel utterly humiliated. What if I send the Inferno Tyrant? Chances of winning increase to 128%. What if it's just me and the Inferno Tyrant? Chances of winning increase to 93%. Note, this data does not include the unknown powerful methods of the opponent. That's enough. Grim quickly communicated with the AI chip and very quickly made up his mind. Against such a powerful opponent, sending out the roaring ones and rotting ones with average battle strength would not be able to turn the situation around. If he wanted to settle things in one fell swoop, he would probably have to send out the strongest battle strength under him, the Inferno Tyrant. As for the Balrog transformation, due to the terrifying repercussions of the Balrog's heart and the fact that the new Balrog transformation tattoo had not been finalized, Grim did not intend to take any risks in the near future. Having made up his mind, Grim no longer hesitated. Once again, he used up an instant cast spell from the secret voodoo scroll to resist Kane's frozen tide. Only then did he find the opportunity to jump to the periphery and toss out the dazzling magic puppet crystal core. In the next second, the originally prideful green sea of trees was suddenly engulfed by a massive amount of fire elemental energy. Within a radius of a kilometer, the battlefield was filled with dazzling red light. Under the shocked gaze of the two-faced Magus Kane, the violent and ferocious fire elemental energy frantically gathered together, and a terrifying 4-meter-tall fire demon crawled up beside Magus Grim. Compared to the flaming men that Grim often created, this terrifying fire demon with peak rank 1 strength had much stronger control over the power of fire. When Grim transformed into a flaming man, his body constantly spewed out violent flames and terrifying streams of fire. Although he looked mighty and his battle strength was astonishing, the amount of fire energy he wasted was even more shocking. However, the fire demon that walked out of monstrous flames had dark red flames around its body. It seemed deep and restrained. Furthermore, Grim was very close to it and could clearly see its body. Not only had this terrifying fire demon tamed the tyrannical flames, but he had also condensed them into a solid substance, turning them into his own real body of flames. The muscles, bones, and internal organs that were condensed from static flames were vivid in his eyes. The dark red flames lingered on the surface of his body and burned quietly. He no longer had that uncontrollable and violent feeling of the past. This was a true Inferno Tyrant that was born from flames. When the Inferno Tyrant appeared on the battlefield, without even making a move, the few people who had been secretly observing the battlefield could not help but have serious expressions. Damn it, how could this bastard fellow an elemental puppet of this level? Chapter 267. Damn it, do you think Kane and Lucy still have chance? Green Dwarf Pyro asked hatefully. The black-robed wizard who had come with him took out a handful of broken bones and scattered them in front of him. He bent over to take a look, then shook his head sadly. Pyro's green eyes revealed a fierce glint. I spent so much money to hire you just to tell me this? The black-robed wizard said calmly. As a level 2 wizard, I'm sure you understand how prophecy works. The more you understand your opponent, the more you can squeeze out uncontrollable variables. This lad has been hiding in the wizard tower all this time. It's extremely difficult to get past the defense of the wizard tower and predict his fate. And I'm sure that when we were preparing for today's operation 3 months ago, Lord Cain would have had an 80% chance of winning against this lad. You mean the enemy suddenly obtained a puppet of this level in the past 3 months? Pyro quickly calmed himself down and asked calmly. Yes. The black-robed wizard nodded. The unknown fate has already told me. His strength skyrocketed after I successfully prophesied him last time. From this, it can be seen that his luck must have fluctuated once during this period. The reason is unknown. I suspect there must be an item or person around him that can affect fate. Obviously, Green Dwarf Pyro wasn't very good at this kind of weird stuff. Although he was baffled, he understood that today's failure was inevitable. As a decisive person, he could not be bothered to wait for the result. He turned around and disappeared into the depths of the forest with this failed prophecy master. Fednan City, Wizard Tower. Lady Sinazar was reclining on a soft bed, lazily watching the battle on the light screen in front of her. Although she had personally handed the wooden statue to Grim, Sinazar obviously did not tell him that as long as he kept the statue by his side, Sinazar would not need any external media to spy on the movements within 100 meters of the statue. So when Sinazar sensed the elemental vibration from the wooden statue, she opened the water mirror and saw the scene of Grim releasing the Inferno Tyrant to fight against the two-faced wizard. With Sinazar's level as a level 3 wizard, this kind of small fight was of course nothing. However, Sinazar's interest was piqued when he saw the powerful flame puppet running amok on the light screen. A little magus who had just advanced to rank 1 already had an elemental puppet that was close to a rank 2 magus. It seemed like this guy had some secrets that were hard for outsiders to understand. If it wasn't for Sir Sarubo not allowing me to touch him, I really wanted to bite his head open and see what was hidden inside. Sinave, who was cruel and tyrannical by nature, could only suppress his curiosity and change into a more comfortable position. He silently watched the battle in the water mirror. The big shots in the distance might be able to look on calmly, but the few people on the battlefield were already facing the choice of life and death, victory or defeat. The two-faced sorcerer, who previously had the upper hand on the battlefield, was now in a sorry state. They agilely moved between the fireballs that were hurtling towards them like raindrops, concentrating on destroying the unavoidable lava fireballs one after another. As long as they were not hit directly by the terrifying lava fireballs, the ice crystal shield around their bodies would be able to hold on. As for the lava fireballs that exploded beside them, they were already powerless to dodge them. They could only rely on the ice crystal shield condensed from the water elemental energy to resist. The two-faced magus Cain's body was encircled by a faint blue frost. He strolled leisurely in the waves of flames. He seemed to be leisurely, but the anxiety in his heart was at its peak. Behind him, wherever he stepped, there would be a 1-meter-wide trail of ice and frost. Any outsider who touched this frost path would be frozen on the spot by the sudden surge of cold energy. Although the freezing effect couldn't last for too long, the short pause was unavoidable. As the owner of this frost path, Cain could appear anywhere in the path at any time. This frost path would not last for too long and would gradually melt after 5 minutes. However, this amount of time was enough for Cain to set up an airtight death field on the battlefield. Any magus would fully explore their battle potential in the field they were good at, forming a battle style that was difficult for outsiders to imitate. However, it was obvious that Cain had kicked an iron plate today. Grim was good at creating his own lava field, and this Cain was obviously the same. Grim had a unique flame leap, so Cain also had his own frost path. 1 ice, 1 fire. Both sides were relatively close in terms of strength, and their battle styles were somewhat similar. Thus, the battles seemed to be more anxious from the beginning. At this time, Kane's sister Lucy, who had a telepathic connection with him, and her terrifying sound wave attack that had the ability to penetrate and break through defenses, became the key to deciding the direction of the battle. However, as Grimm summoned the killer weapon, the Inferno Tyrant, the entire battle situation was once again ruthlessly turned around by him. Ever since the Inferno Tyrant appeared on the battlefield, he had become an overwhelming and terrifying force. The terrifying elemental attack strength, as high as 135 degrees, made the simple lava fireballs a heavy blow that Kane and Lucy could not withstand. Lucy was responsible for defending against the first lava fireball that the Inferno Tyrant released, an ear-piercing scream and a death roar. 2 consecutive sound wave sorcery allowed Lucy to destroy this seemingly inconspicuous fireball midway. The only consequence of this was that the location where the lava fireball exploded was a little too close to Lucy. Lucy, who had her witchcraft protection eroded by the splashing lava, let out an ear-piercing scream. However, this time it was not a sound wave sorcery, but her female instincts after the intense pain. As a twin soul brother and sister, Kane's witchcraft defense and mobility were undoubtedly the best, while Lucy's was superior in terms of penetration and breaking through defenses. Thus, Kane had no choice but to drill out of his body again and replace Lucy's position, using layers of ice crystal shields to wrap his body. The injured Lucy was also able to drill into his body and begin to heal her injuries and prepare for the next spell. If the violent lava fireball just now was only a killer weapon that the Inferno Tyrant could occasionally use, then Kane, who was good at defense, might be able to hold on for a while longer. However, when he really faced the fire demon that was striding over and continuously throwing millstone-sized fireballs at him, he was horrified to realize that the other party's attack power had actually been stabilized at a terrifying 135 degrees. Ice Demon Kane gritted his teeth and forcefully withstood 3 or 4 lava fireballs before he vomited blood and spat out his lungs, while angrily cursing the perverted elemental puppet in all sorts of dialects. Ice Demon Kane absorbed the water elements in the air desperately and converted them into the power of ice that he was good at, using them to extinguish the flames that persistently burned on his robe. While doing all this, he still needed to constantly change his position and use tall trees to obstruct the other party's advance. Looking at the other party's large black and red hand that was like a ghost claw and the terrifying body that was condensed from pure flames, Kane really did not have the guts to compete with the other party in physical combat anymore. The ice crystal shield could be summoned again if it was destroyed, and the ice barrier that was corroded and riddled with holes could be slowly mended. However, as the battle progressed, even Kane's body was now burning with 4 or 5 flames. The scorching heat made him grimace in pain, but he no longer had the energy to care about it. This was because that damned fire demon had actually started to cast area of effect spells again. In normal battles between magi, due to the existence of defensive spells, as well as the fact that magi had higher resistances, there were very few people who would cast area of effect spells that had a large area of effect and dispersed elemental energy. Even if it was occasionally cast, it was usually used to restrict the other party's area of activity. However, this damned fire demon in front of him, it could actually even cast area of effect spells that reached a terrifying 110 degrees. This made Kane so angry that he wanted to hug his head and cry bitterly. 110 degrees. Even Kane, who thought highly of himself, could only activate a single target spell that could barely reach this level. However, the sea of flames that the other party had casually thrown out was already of a higher degree than the attack power that he could only release after holding back for a long time. Left with no choice, Kane could only desperately teleport on the frost path to avoid the burning of the flames that pierced through his heart. The Inferno Tyrant might not have high intelligence, and could only passively chase after Kane and throw fireballs. However, Grimm, who had his hands free, grasped the key to the battle in time, and threw out 7 or 8 lava fireballs in one go. These lava fireballs were not used to attack Cain, but to cut off the frost path. The frost path that had been laid out on the battlefield obviously had Cain's spiritual undulations attached to it. It was by relying on their positioning that Cain was able to appear and disappear at any place on the path. Now, the entire path had been blown apart by Grimm and had been broken into pieces. Although it did not completely destroy them, it had cut off more than half of them from Cain. With this, the space that Cain could move around and became increasingly narrow. During this period of time, that Sister Lucy had also appeared once again, and the violent sonic explosion that she had triggered had even shattered one of the Inferno Tyrant's arms. Unfortunately, against a flaming demonic boss that did not feel pain or fear and only knew how to attack with all his might, all of this was useless. As the huge ring of fire rolled on the Inferno Tyrant's body, a new black-red arm condensed again. After losing Ice Demon Cain's densely packed ice crystal shield, Lucy was once again attacked by the terrifying flames. This time, it was not their robes that were ignited, but their bodies, hair, and flesh. At this point in the battle, this pair of sorcerer siblings were no longer hoping for victory, but for an opportunity to escape. Unfortunately, just the Inferno Tyrant alone was enough to make them run for their lives. As for their original opponent, Grimm, he had turned into a Grim Reaper and wandered around the periphery of the battlefield, carefully and seriously blocking off every single opportunity for them to escape. Finally, as the Inferno Tyrant's terrifying flaming storm engulfed the entire battlefield, Cain and Lucy's mournful screams rang out at the same time. In the next second, a human figure that was completely charred black and whose original appearance could no longer be distinguished staggered out of the monstrous sea of fire. At the edge of the field of fire, Grimm was already waiting there, holding the voodoo secret scroll. Chapter 268. 4 days later, Grimm and his party arrived at Moda's City without a hitch. Moda's City was the only public city within a 500-mile radius. It did not belong to any wizard family or organization, but was a public area designated by the Wizard Association of Tallinn. Before entering the city, Grimm could already see the towering public wizard tower that pierced through the clouds. Faint fluorescent light glowed on the gray walls of the tower, and rings of light from spells lit up on the tower from time to time. The light quickly spread to the top of the tower above the clouds. Although there were white clouds in the way, Grimm could still see some black dots rising and falling at the top of the tower. An endless fleet of carriages gathered near the city gate, and under the command of a group of black armor guards, they were allowed to pass through in an orderly manner. There were men and women, old and young, in the crowd, and the noise was so loud that it filled the sky. Beside the rows of fully loaded carriages, Grimm's black four-wheeled carriage seemed inconspicuous. However, when the black armor guards guarding the city gates saw this, they hurriedly cleared the crowd under the command of one of their leaders, allowing the black carriage to slowly drive through the city gates. There was no reason at all. The Cerubo family crest embedded on the side of the black carriage was the best pass. In the vast land of the wizard continent, no one had ever dared to impersonate a respected wizard. Once such a vile act was discovered, death was the lowest punishment that the impersonator could imagine. This was a magnificent and beautiful wizard city. Endless streams of people filled the streets here. Heavy carriages slowly passed by on the bluestone road, piled with various kinds of goods, but most of them were luxury goods such as tobacco, alcohol, oil, and tea. Grimm gently lifted the curtains, watching people of different skin colors and clothes quickly passing by in front of the window. He had a strange feeling in his heart. The people who lived on the Sorcerer Continent were used to using their own methods to distinguish who they could provoke and who they couldn't. Although Grimm's carriage looked inconspicuous, the eye-catching wizard family crest at the corner of the carriage made everyone's expression change. The crowd moved aside from the carriage, and no one dared to stop the black carriage from moving forward quickly. You and Cabby settle down and book a place to stay on the floating ship. I'll pay a visit to the Magus Tower. After giving some simple instructions, Grimm jumped off the carriage and covered his face with his black hood before disappearing into the crowd. Every time they arrived in a region, the first thing they did was to visit the local magus organization. This was actually a tradition and habit of most magi. After all, the wizard organizations in various regions would selectively open some of their facilities to the public, including the public library. Habitually, gathering knowledge was also one of the most common things magi did. Alice had been brooding over the fact that she was unable to witness the wizard war last time because she was enchanted by someone. Watching Grim disappear into the crowd, she said angrily, "Let's go to the airship first." Kobe, who was disguised as a coachman, shouted loudly and waved his whip to urge the carriage to continue moving forward. As one of the few public areas in the scattered tower forest, it did not reject any wizard's visit. Even some magi who had lost in family struggles or power struggles could recuperate here and obtain some magus resources that were not that rare. Some magi who wanted to establish a new family did not have their own territory when they first started out. They would usually use the public magus tower as the first stepping stone for their family. They would set up some public magus academies here and recruit acolytes who did not have any backing or background. Using this method, a small organization with a few magi and a few dozen acolytes could be established in less than 100 years. What they needed to do next was to work hard to survive in the cracks between the many magus families and organizations and slowly expand their own territory. Any piece of land in the scattered tower forest that matured was basically already occupied by various families and organizations of various sizes. If they wanted to snatch a piece of bread from their mouths, they could only rely on war and strength. If they succeeded, they would become one of the 1,000 or so magus families in the scattered tower forest. If they failed, they could only return to the public areas and continue to run their own small organizations, accumulating strength for the next attack on the magus families. In the previous family wars, small organizations like the Black Hand Association had been so enthusiastic. It was all for the sake of obtaining their own territory and raising their flag to establish their own magus family. It was a pity that the strongest rank 1 magus in the organization had been killed, and the two-faced magus they had spent a large amount of money to hire had also failed. This also meant that the Black Hand Association's efforts over the past 100 years had been for naught. The rank 2 Green Dwarf Pyro's efforts to establish the Pyro family could only be delayed for another 100 years. A rank 2 magus. He was an influential figure in the magus community. If such a person was willing to join any magus family, they would be welcomed with open arms, and all sorts of rare resources would be at their fingertips. However, even such a powerful magus would find it difficult to defend against the attacks of any small magus family if he wanted to establish his own family. Grim had used the benefits he had obtained from the Knight's Plane to buy a viscount's territory of 100 square kilometers in the scattered tower forest. But so what? He was surrounded by covetous sorcerer families and hungry sorcerer organizations. Even if he bought such a territory, what would he rely on to protect it? Perhaps the first to send troops to attack his territory would be the magus family that had sold it to him. Resources and territory were indeed important in the magus continent, but the strength to defend them was even more important. Grim mixed into the crowd and slowly walked towards a magus tower. There were fewer and fewer regular people on the streets, and more acolytes dressed in academy uniforms. Among these acolytes, there was no lack of middle-aged men in their 30s or 40s, as well as elderly men with stooped backs. However, most of them were young men and women in their 20s. In terms of strength, most of them were junior and intermediate acolytes. There were few high-grade acolytes, and not a single quasi-magus could be seen. This situation was actually quite normal. After all, in a place with a public academy, they would be much weaker than magus families with fixed territories and resources to recruit talented acolytes. The lack of resources and the low aptitude of the acolytes resulted in the overall strength of the acolytes being on the lower side. Moreover, if a magus academy managed to nurture a quasi-magus, they would treat them like a treasure. How could they be willing to let them roam around? Grim was dressed in a black robe. Although he didn't have any emblems on his chest, he had the arrogance and mysteriousness of a magus. Every acolyte who saw him hurriedly dodged to the side and bowed to him. Acolytes who could survive in Moda City were not newbies. They might not be good at other things, but they were definitely good at judging people. Although Grim was keeping a low profile as he walked, the corners of his magus robe could be seen under the cover of his black robe. It was full of mysterious and abstruse magic lines and runes. An exquisite silver chain was tied around Grim's waist. As he walked, the magic book glowed with golden runes. It was obviously not an ordinary item. 2 strands of dark red hair hung down from the sides of the hood. Under the sunlight, they looked like 2 slightly dancing flames. Under the shadow of the deep hood, the chiseled face and the eyes that were as bright as the morning stars left an extremely deep impression on people. Grim walked into the gate of the Magus Tower. A dozen acolytes waiting by the side of the gate saw Grim, and their eyes immediately lit up. However, before they could do anything, a round-faced acolyte with short tawny hair stood in front of Grim and bowed. "Respected Sir Magus, Acolyte Thor is willing to serve you." The other acolytes all showed a look of annoyance. However, in front of Magus, they did not dare to act rashly. They could only glare at Thor and quickly left. Grim, on the other hand, did not mind these little tricks between acolytes. He raised his head and looked around. The floor was clean and tidy, and the fresh air was filled with a strong scent of magic. There were many small stone rooms lined up against the walls of the tower, and there were many tunnels and corridors that extended in all directions. Although it was crowded here, it was rather quiet. All the acolytes walked in groups of 3 to 5, carrying thick sheepskin books in their arms. Even if they needed to talk, most of them kept their voices low, not daring to make a racket in the Hall of Secret Spells. The first impression he got was that the atmosphere at a university on Earth was somewhat similar. "Bring me to the public library. I want to read some materials," Grim ordered. "Yes, the library for visiting Sir Magi is on the 5th floor. Please follow me." Thor was obviously familiar with this kind of request. He bowed politely and brought Grim to a floating disc in the corner of the Hall of Secret Spells. The so-called floating disc was somewhat similar to the elevators on Earth, but did not use mechanical power or electricity. The floating disc was 5 meters wide and could accommodate 20 to 30 people standing on it. However, as far as Grim could see, not a single acolyte dared to step on it. This seemed to be a privilege exclusive to Magi. Grim controlled the control center on the floating disc, and the circular stone plate, which was decorated with exquisite patterns, began to slowly float towards the upper floors of the Magus Tower. Along the way, on the corridors of the floors, sorcerer apprentices could be seen walking around with books in their hands. Level 5 of the Magus Tower. Thor brought Grim to a door of dense light and stopped in his tracks. "Sir, this is the open Magus-level library. Only Magi are allowed to enter. So, all right." Grim nodded in understanding and threw 3 magic crystals into Thor's arms. "Sir, I don't need so much." Thor's face was filled with joy. "I only need 1 magic crystal. I have 2 servants. There might be a female magus called Alice looking for me. Remember to bring her here." "Understood, sir." "Thor will definitely complete the task," Thor promised resolutely. Chapter 269. There was indeed a small library behind the Door of Light. The reason why it was small was because it was only about 20 to 30 square meters in size. There were rows of wooden shelves along the wall, on top of which were some sparsely placed books. However, a faint glow could be seen on the surface of each book, as if they were protected by some kind of spell. The number of Magi here was pitifully small. Only 2 Magi stood beside the wooden shelves, flipping through the books as if there was no one else around. "Are you a magus that just arrived? To avoid trouble, it's best if you wear your organization's badge on your chest." An old magus, sitting at a wooden table at the entrance of the Door of Light, put down the book in his hands and reminded him with a frown. It seemed that even in public areas, wandering magi were still being investigated. One could imagine that for evildoers like the two-faced magus who were listed as wanted by the scattered Magus Association in Tallinn, they were also prohibited from entering public areas. Grimm took out the crescent-shaped silver badge that represented the Salubo family from his storage belt and pinned it on his chest. The old magus in charge of this place was slightly stunned and said slowly, "The Salubo family? He doesn't look familiar. Could it be that you're the fire demon that appeared recently?" Hearing the old magus words, the two magi who were minding their own business raised their heads and looked at Grimm carefully. "Is there a problem?" Grimm asked doubtfully. "Of course there's no problem. However," the old magus hesitated for a moment, "I heard that the Salubo family and the Black Hand Association are in conflict. A few magi from the Black Hand Association are often active in Moda City, so it's best if you're careful when you go in and out." Seeing that the old magus had good intentions, Grimm smiled and nodded at him before walking towards the bookshelf closest to him. He casually picked up a blue sheepskin book with a hardcover, Gulliver's Travels. It seemed to be a journey recorded by an official magus. Although it did not involve any advanced magic knowledge or theories, the description and records of some special magical creatures and plants still had a certain value as a reference. The book was priced at 10 magic crystals. Grimm put aside. This kind of book did not have much value, but it was still good to fill up the iChips database. Jihao then picked up an ancient parchment, which seemed to be a formula of some kind of magic medicine, highly poisonous. However, the refining process, material ratio, and precautions were all protected by a faint fluorescent light. Price, 400 mana crystals. Grimm hesitated, then put it back. In the short term, he had no plans to become a pharmacist. Moreover, this kind of physical poison formula did not seem to have much effect on wizards, so spending 400 magic crystals for it was not really necessary. He picked up many books in succession, but most of them were extremely ordinary basic theories. Occasionally, he would find some improved spell models, but all of them were ridiculously expensive. Grimm shook his head as he read. He browsed through more than half of the library, but he only picked out 3 books that were slightly valuable. This was actually inevitable. After all, this was just a public library of the Wizard Tower of Moda City. This was a place that only wandering wizards or those who were short of money would visit. As for the truly valuable knowledge, it was obviously stored elsewhere, and it was only open to members of the Wizard Tower. Only people like the Black Hand Association, who had no foundation and were willing to make this their headquarters and take on some of the daily tasks of the Wizard Tower, could be regarded as a member of the Wizard Tower and become one of the guardians of the public area. "Hey, kid from the Sarubo family, there seems to be a little girl looking for you outside." The old magus voice sounded. "Got it." Grimm brought the 3 books to the door, and after handing over the magic crystals, the old magus removed the protective spell formation on the books. When Grimm passed through the door of light, he saw Alice outside. The acolyte, Tolly, was not there. It seemed that Alice had sent him away. "I've already booked a ticket for tomorrow afternoon. I'll be staying at the Bustling Inn tonight." After this period of interaction, Alice seemed to have accepted her fate and was no longer as hot-tempered as before. Once she calmed down, with her intelligence as a quasi-magus, she would be able to help Grimm solve many unnecessary problems. Following Alice to the inn, Grimm immediately ordered the waiter to send food and drinks to his room. He quickly recorded the contents of the 3 books into the iChips database, and then continued to study the strange runes of the foreign world. After receiving the old magus warning and reminder, Grimm also put away his plans to wander around Moda City and did not take a step out of the inn. That was until Alice and Cabby came to remind him that it was almost time to board the ship. When Grimm brought Alice and Cabby to the docking point in Moda City, a flying ship similar to the one from before was slowly descending on a Highland green lawn. There was no hot air balloon and there was no propeller. The spacious bottom of the flying ship shone with golden light, and a faintly discernible spell formation was releasing strong and weak air currents, supporting it to land steadily. The flying ship that Grim had boarded last time seemed to have a pointed bottom and obviously could not carry as much cargo as this flat-bottomed one. Near the high platform, there was a crowd of people. Heavy carriages filled with goods were already waiting here, and a large group of burly men were shouting and humming as they moved the goods from the hold of the ship, and then moved on new goods. On the lawn around the Highland, some people in Magus robes were chatting leisurely, as if they were also waiting to board the ship. In less than an hour, the goods were all unloaded. Hence, the Magi, who were the passengers, as well as some people dressed like nobles, began to board the ship and stood at the edge of the railing, waving to the people below. Shouts and cries could be heard from the lawn below the ship. Soon, as the energy waves from the spell formation at the bottom of the ship gradually increased, and under the cover of strong wind particles, the flying ship shook slightly and left the ground. Looking at the gradually ascending flying ship, two Magi in a wooden house in the distance looked over with fierce eyes, their eyes filled with strong resentment. "Lord, are we letting him go just like that?" A middle-aged Magus with a sharp face said hatefully. "What else can we do but let him go?" The other Magus was the leader of the Black Hand Association, Green Dwarf Pyro. "This is Modus City, and it's not our place to be in charge. That old bastard already warned me that if I dare to kill visiting Magi in Modus City, they will refuse to provide us with protection. If that happens, that poisonous loach from Sarubo's family will probably want to swallow us whole. That guy called Fire Devil is quite vigilant. He actually hid in the inn and did not take a single step out, causing some of our secret plans to fail. Did he get wind of something?" The thin Magus was still indignant. "I already know that. Seems like it's also something those old bastards did. They secretly warned that kid." Pyro's eyes flashed with a vicious light. "Lord, you also have to be careful in the organization," the thin Magus said hesitantly. I heard what? I heard that there's already an organization in contact with Fernan and Valor." Hearing this, Pyro was shocked. He had spent more than 200 years roping in the 6th grade, one Magi in the organization. Losing my Ceylon, who was the strongest among them, was enough to make his heart ache. If the remaining Magi were taken away by others while the Black Hand Association's morale was down, how could the Pyro family of his dreams be realized? "What have you heard? Hurry up and tell me in detail." The two Magi put their heads together and began to discuss in low voices. Grim, who was completely unaware of all this, stood at the edge of the ship, silently looking down at the scenery below him. The flying ship rose higher and higher, and everything on the ground became smaller and smaller. Even the towering Magus Tower that was originally so tall that it pierced through the clouds now looked a little slimmer, like a thick cigar stuck in a big cake. Looking down from above, the area where Modi City was located revealed the grayish-white ground and colorful buildings. Around the city, there were large golden wheat fields and human villages that looked like squares. Just a little further, there was an undulating sea of green trees and a grayish-white path that looked like sheep intestines. The path that humans had opened was winding, and from time to time, it would split into even thinner paths. From afar, these grayish-white paths looked more like blood vessels that grew out of the sea of green trees. As the flying ship continued to rise, the surrounding temperature began to drop. The chilly wind whistled past, causing one to shiver uncontrollably. Of course, such a small problem would not bother a Magus. A layer of faint red light appeared on Grim's body, and he became warm again. Ever since he had chosen to specialize in fire, the other elemental particles had basically started to repel Grim. This also meant that it would be difficult for Grim to use his own strength to cast elemental spells of other elements, and he could only walk the path of fire to the end. Fortunately, there were magic wands in this world. A magic wand enchanted with a water-making spell could prevent Grim from dying of thirst in the desert, and a magic wand enchanted with a flying spell could prevent him from falling to his death from the sky. If all else failed, he still had magic wands of various shapes and forms in his belt that he could use. Hence, even though he was hovering at an altitude of almost 1,000 meters, Grim was not worried about his own safety. He quickly got used to the scenery below, and it no longer attracted Grimm's attention. Hence, he shifted his gaze to the deck of the flying ship. Chapter 270. The airship ticket was calculated by the number of people who boarded it. It was neither too high nor too low, so each person had to pay 200 magic crystals. This basically eliminated the possibility of ordinary people and low-rank acolytes taking the airship. When Grimm was an acolyte, he could get no more than 10 magic crystals per month. After deducting the basic expenses of borrowing books, renting laboratories, and purchasing magic materials, the magic crystals that could be saved were few and far between. Wanting to earn more magic crystals? The only way was to accept the apprenticeship missions issued by the Magus Association. However, such missions usually meant that one had to travel a long distance, and sometimes one had to disregard one's own safety to enter some dangerous places. Whether it was the wild grasslands, the boundless forests, or some hidden ruins, the dangers hidden in them were all fatal to acolytes. For most low-rank acolytes, 200 magic crystals was an unimaginable amount of money, and only those at the level of a prospective sorcerer could afford it. He scanned the deck. Apart from KB and Alice, the rest were all magi dressed in robes of various colors. Almost half of the magi had blurred their faces with elemental particles, and one look was enough to tell that they were unsociable fellows who did not like to be disturbed. Most of the magi who revealed their faces wore cloth robes, and their expressions were peaceful, as if they had nothing to do with the world. Grimm muttered to himself for a moment. He had also heard of this type of magi in some books that introduced them. They did not like to fight and only liked to quietly do their own research, accumulating knowledge bit by bit, and spending most of their lives in laboratories. That was why they were usually called scholar-type magi. Since Grimm had chosen to specialize in fire, it would be difficult for him to walk the path of a scholar-type magus, which was not in line with his personality. Ever since he had awakened the chip, Grimm had always been strengthening his own combat strength, and the purpose of researching magic was to improve his own abilities. Although he was very interested in making magic puppets, he was very clear about his true nature. Being a combat magus was his main profession, and making magic puppets was only a part-time job to support his combat strength. However, these scholar-type magi were the exact opposite. They rarely studied combat and killing techniques. Instead, they regarded some auxiliary part-time jobs as their main job. As a result, countless non-combat professions such as pharmacists, enchanters, puppeteers, summoners, alchemists, and spell masters emerged one after another. These people formed a huge branch of the sorcerer community, the arcane sorcerers. This group of people shouted, "Knowledge is power." In order to distinguish themselves from those madmen who loved to fight and kill, they all put on silver robes and established a completely different wizard organization in the west of the continent, the Silver Alliance. Although their individual combat power was not strong, they relied on strange auxiliary methods and large numbers of people to push the Silver Alliance into the ranks of the Sorcerer Continent's 3 major sorcerer organizations. Grimm was going to visit the core city of the Silver Alliance, Sky City. It was said that all the silver-robed sorcerers had gathered their collective wisdom and combined a large amount of knowledge from other planes. After thousands of years, they had built this magnificent city, a sorcerer's city that floated in the sky. It was because of this miraculous sky city that the Silver Alliance had been able to stand tall for tens of thousands of years, becoming the holy city in the hearts of all the arcane sorcerers in the Sorcerer Continent. Every year, new sorcerers who had just advanced to become arcane sorcerers would set the Sky City as their ultimate goal of pilgrimage, and they would personally make a trip there. Many new sorcerers who went there liked the learning atmosphere and the rich professional resources there, so they simply chose to stay there. This undoubtedly strengthened the Silver Alliance's talent pool and strength from the side. In addition, the Silver Alliance's territory was full of talents. There were all kinds of potions, magic artifacts, sorcery equipment, and magic puppets. Therefore, sorcerer organizations and forces in other regions of the Sorcerer Continent could only travel tens of thousands of miles to Sky City to deal with the Silver Alliance if they wanted to obtain these top-notch resources. With all these advantages stacked together, Sky City became the Sorcerer Continent's most prosperous and lively trading capital. It was the focal point where talents, knowledge, and resources gathered. However, it was not easy to go to Sky City. Currently, the Sorcerer Continent had developed a few large regions. The Scattered Towers region was located in the middle of the continent, while the Silver Alliance's region was in the west. The distance between the two could be said to be the closest. However, it was a pity that the two great forces did not realize a true connection. The Windu region in the westernmost part of the Scattered Towers region was a vast 370,000 kilometers away from the region ruled by the Silver Alliance. Most of the primeval forest that separated the two regions belonged to the unexplored Rank 3 region, so it was impossible to pass through. The so-called Rank 3 region referred to those terrifying regions that even Rank 3 sorcerers would be in danger if they entered. In order to preserve the Sorcerer Continent's original ecology, as well as to maintain the sorcerer's spirit of forging ahead, the great sorcerers who chose to leave had once joined forces to clean up all the creatures that were Rank 5 and above. This allowed the sorcerers and the ferocious magical beasts to maintain a delicate ecological balance. However, looking at the entire Sorcerer Continent, the inhabited areas that humans had developed only occupied 12% of the total area of the continent. Hence, compared to humans, the living space of the magical beasts was much larger, and their numbers and species were also much greater. The primeval regions near the human-inhabited areas had been trampled by the sorcerers countless times, so they were basically safe. However, as long as one ventured more than 10,000 kilometers into the primeval regions, even a Rank 1 sorcerer might not be able to survive. If one ventured more than 100,000 kilometers, any sorcerer below Rank 2 would die. Hence, in order to connect the existing human-inhabited areas, since ancient times, countless sorcerers had died wave after wave in the depths of the primeval forest that no one knew about. It was by relying on their continuous efforts and slow exploration that they found a passageway in the dense forest that they could barely pass through. The Silver Alliance had built a large number of airships that traversed this passageway, which was sometimes safe and sometimes dangerous. They continuously transported resources and supplies from various regions to Sky City, then sold the top-grade resources produced by Sky City to every corner of the continent. The airship that Grimm was currently on was located in the airspace of the Scattered Towers region, so it was relatively safe. However, once he reached the Windu region, he would have to take a risk if he wanted to cross the 370,000 kilometers of primeval forests. After looking at the strange scenery below the airship for a while, Grimm finally felt a little tired and turned around to enter the narrow cabin. Just like any other cabin, after descending 10 steps, a narrow and dim corridor appeared in front of him. There were 5 doors on each side of the corridor, and on each door hung a bronze plate with a basic rune engraved on it. There were runes representing plants, sun, and knowledge. The runes on the bronze plates were not repeated, so it was obvious that they were used to differentiate the rooms of the sorcerers. Some of the runes on the bronze plates had already lit up, so it seemed that there were sorcerers living in the rooms. Only sorcerers were allowed to stay on the first and second floors. Even with Alice's status as a quasi-sorcerer, she could barely get a cabin on the 3rd floor, which was the same floor as the nobles. Intelligent slaves of other races like Cabby could only hide in the darkest and most humid 4th floor. During the flight, the servants at the lowest floor were not allowed to enter the upper floors to avoid disturbing the mood of the sorcerers and nobles. They could only eat, drink, and defecate there. Even if they were bullied, they could only endure it silently. Otherwise, the sorcerers in charge of the airship's safety had the right to throw anyone who did not obey their orders off the airship. Although she already knew about this, when it was her turn to enjoy this kind of differential treatment, Alice still could not be happy. She pouted and walked to the end of the corridor with Cabby, because the stairs leading to the lower floor were there. After all, this was a world where sorcerers were respected. Even if Grimm wanted to keep the two of them by his side, it would cause other sorcerers to be unhappy. In many places, there were some privileges that only sorcerers were allowed to enjoy. This was actually an atmosphere created by the sorcerers, and no one was allowed to easily break it. Grimm randomly picked an empty room and pushed open the wooden door. Perhaps the runes on the bronze plate sensed the presence of sorcerer power and began to emit a faint fluorescent light. The so-called room was a small cabin with a wooden bed fixed at the end of the wall. The bedding on it was clean. Other than that, the only decoration in the cabin was a small table and chair made of redwood, which looked very sturdy. On the wall above the head of the bed, there was a window the size of a wash basin. It was inlaid with a colorless, transparent crystal glass. Judging from the material, it should be a very hard, vulcanized crystal. This kind of crystal glass might seem thin, but it would be difficult for a normal sword to cut it. Grimm did a simple inspection of the room and did not discover any hidden spell formations or special energy waves. He then closed the door and sat down on a chair. After searching in his waist pouch for a while, Grimm took out a thick sheepskin book with a black cover and golden edges. He flipped it open and read it carefully. On the bottom right corner of the book, he saw a line of small words. The soul is above the matter, and the mind is the product of the combination of matter and spirit. Kane. This was the magic notes written by Wizard Kane, one of the dual sorcerers. Mind Whisper. It had to be said that each of Grimm's fire element spells was more powerful than the last, and they had great destructive power. Although he had the upper hand against the enemy, it was difficult to get any decent loot. Chapter 271. 4 days later, after passing by 7 public cities along the way, the airship finally docked at Guap Port in the Wenda region. If he continued westward, he would have to pass through an uninhabited primeval forest. A small airship like the one he was on now would not be able to handle such a difficult task. If he wanted to smoothly reach the area ruled by the Silver Alliance, he would have to change to a more sturdy aerial fortress, the floating battleship. That was why when Grimm, Alice, and KB alighted from the airship, they were shocked by a terrifying ship not far away. It was a huge, jet-black battleship, more than 10 times the size of an ordinary airship. 3 tall masts were distributed in the front, middle, and back of the ship. Although there were sails on the masts, Grimm could feel that they were not driven by wind. Grimm had good eyesight. Even from half a mile away, he could clearly see many strange runes and magic lines engraved on the masts. Moreover, under the sunlight, the mast reflected a cold metallic luster, giving off a feeling of unbreakable sturdiness at first glance. There were countless portholes in the shuttle-shaped hull, but they were all covered by thick metal plates, making it impossible to see what was inside. But according to Grimm's experience in his previous life, a sturdy ship would never be able to do without cannons. That might be the firing point of this floating battleship. The only thing he did not know was what kind of war equipment was hidden inside. There was a 2-story building on the hull, but it did not look like it was used for living. Instead, it looked like a platform for wizards to cast spells and battle spells. The jet-black floating battleship was quietly parked on high ground. From afar, it looked like a terrifying steel beast, giving off a cold and powerful feeling. This was probably the floating battleship the Silver Alliance had prepared to pass through dangerous sea routes. When Grimm moved his gaze away from the floating battleship, he realized that the place where the airship landed was not a city, but an airport specially used for transporting goods and personnel. Along the edge of the forest, there were rows of large wooden houses. Countless humans and strange-looking alien laborers were moving goods in and out. Obviously, that was the warehouse of the airport. Far away from the forest, there were rows of stone houses. In the open space in front of the stone houses, there were many people who looked like magi looking at them and pointing at them. They seemed to be discussing something. In the center of the airport, there was a tall, pointed stone tower, shining with mysterious spell symbols. Hidden detection waves were slowly sweeping across the air, and the furthest point of these waves was the forest tens of miles away. Watchtower. The space inside the tower was too small, and it was impossible to accommodate too many magi. It was also impossible to store large-scale, warm magi weapons, so it was mainly used for surveillance. 5 miles behind him, he could see the undulating black sea of trees. This was already the edge of the human settlements in the central part of the continent, and there were no signs of human settlement activity in the surrounding forest, so it was even more impossible for there to be any large-scale settlements. However, there were still sporadic groups of hunters and adventurers operating around the edge of the forest. Occasionally, some wizards looking for materials would appear in this area. Just as Grimm was slowly browsing through the spaceport, a low and hoarse voice sounded beside him. "Welcome, Lord Grimm." Grimm turned around and immediately saw the wrinkled face of Magus Angus. "It's nice to see you again." Grimm smiled and nodded in greeting. "You just arrived, sir. Please find a place to rest first. The tickets to Sky City have been arranged, and we can leave in 3 days." Compared to before, Magus Angus was much more polite. "Isn't there a floating battleship there? Why are we waiting for so long?" Grimm asked curiously. "The floating battleship is ready, but we don't have enough magi." Angus explained in a simple manner. The sea route to Sky City has changed for thousands of years. Although we've basically figured out the distribution of magical creatures along the way, there are still dangers. To be on the safe side, the floating battleship will stop at this spaceport for a few days every time. We'll only leave when we have enough magi. Enough magi? This was the first time Grimm had heard of such a thing. Roughly how many? Under normal circumstances, 60 magi will be enough. If we meet some high-grade magi along the way, it won't be a problem no matter how small the number is. Grimm couldn't help but click his tongue after hearing this. 60 magi? Even if all the magi in the Salubo family were added together, they wouldn't be able to reach this number. Moreover, the floating battleship needed so many magi to pass through once. From what he knew, this kind of floating battleship needed to pass through every half a month. Based on this, the number of magi traveling between Sky City and Sky City every year was simply unimaginable. Seeing Grimm's surprised expression, Magus Angus smiled in understanding. "Don't be surprised. Wait until you reach Sky City. You'll be even more shocked. The number of magi, there will be more than you can imagine. Come, I've already arranged a place for you to rest. Wait here patiently for 3 days. After 3 days, a new flying ship will arrive here. By then, we'll have gathered the 60 magi we need." So that's how it is. After understanding the whole story, Grimm was relieved. He brought Alice and KB to the row of stone houses under Magus Angus' guidance. The residences here were also very simple. Apart from a wooden bed, there was only a simple set of tables and chairs. There were no other decorations. Of course, if you didn't like this place, you only needed to walk 20 miles to the east. There was a small human city with all kinds of entertainment facilities. However, Grimm was not in the mood to have fun. Once he had settled down, he pulled Wizard Angus into a secret room and began to discuss. After all, he still didn't know the specifics of this trip to Sky City. He still had no idea what he should do or how he should do it. This was too passive for someone like Grimm, who liked to plan things out before making a move. If it was just to help Wizard Angus's Byron family win a small competition, he wouldn't be so worried. However, he wanted KB to stay in Sky City. The more he knew about the situation there, the higher his chances of success would be. Through Wizard Angus' endless explanation, Grimm finally understood the basic structure and rules of Sky City. He also had a basic understanding of the so-called competition. According to Wizard Angus' description, Sky City was a floating wizard city in the sky. The whole city was distributed in a circular fashion. It could be roughly divided into the inner ring, the middle ring, and the outer ring. The inner ring was the area that only the elite members of the Silver Alliance were allowed to enter. The main control core of Sky City was located there. There were also the famous Prophet's Tower, Whirlpool Tower, and Obelisk, as well as the Storm Stronghold. The only way to enter there was to join the Silver Alliance, and become an honorable member of the council. Otherwise, it would be impossible to even take a step inside. As for the middle ring, it was the main activity area for normal members of the Silver Alliance and arcane wizards. Only wizards recognized by the Silver Alliance could stay there and study. As for the trade of Sky City, it was concentrated in the outer ring. Non-alliance members were also allowed to stay there and open shops. However, the qualification to open a shop will be tested once every 10 years. The way of the test was a fair and reasonable arcane competition. Esoteric competitions could be divided into many types. There were competitions between potioneers, alchemists, and puppeteers. As long as it was within the scope of esoteric sorcerers, similar competitions could be found in the Sky Castle. Apart from the shops that were opened by Sky City, the number of shops that could be sold to the public was limited. Therefore, rare goods could only be hoarded by the highest bidder. Any wizard family or organization that wanted to obtain a shop in Sky City had to win the arcane competition in order to have the right to stay here. Every existing shop had to accept challenges from outsiders during the year of the competition. Both sides would invite arcane wizards and compete fairly. The winner would stay, and the loser would have to leave Sky City. The Byron family shop in the Outer Ring had a long history of more than 70 years. It was also the main way for their family to obtain a steady stream of resources from elite wizards. They could not afford to lose it so easily. This year, the Byron family shop was challenged by a powerful family called the Greto family. As the challenged family, the Byron family had the right to choose the arcane competition. Their choice this year was undoubtedly the puppeteer competition. This was actually a trick that the higher-ups of the Silver Alliance deliberately played to increase the status of arcane wizards. Using this method, any wizard family or organization that wanted to enter Sky City could only work hard to nurture a powerful arcane wizard. If they really could not nurture one, they could simply choose to hire an arcane wizard from Sky City. In this way, the status of the arcane sorcerers also rose along with the tide. Many talented but cash-strapped arcane sorcerers could also use this opportunity to obtain sufficient resources to continue their own research. However, this also made it hard for the sorcerer families who wanted to but lacked the ability to do so. After all, in order to cultivate a qualified arcane sorcerer, regardless of whether it was an alchemist who could create magic items or sorcery equipment, or an alchemist or a puppet master, the expenses were not something a small family could afford. Chapter 272. His conversation with Wizard Angus lasted the entire night. Grimm also learned about the rules of the Puppet Master competition. It could be divided into a Battle Royale, which was won by quantity, and a Battle Royale, which was won by quality. Every Puppet Master had a limit to their spiritual power. The number of puppets they could control at a time was limited by their spiritual power, and it was impossible for them to grow infinitely. Therefore, the first Battle Royale was more of a test of the Puppet Master's spiritual power and control of the puppets. The second mode was the Marionette Battle Mode, which was the favorite mode for most marionettes. Two Puppet Masters would send out their carefully crafted puppets, and they would fight each other head-on, just like how humans would fight in a ring. The more intricately crafted puppet, the more powerful the puppet would win. Of course, this was a test of the Puppet Master's skill and experience. A powerful Puppet Master would always be able to give their puppets more combat power. On the other hand, it was also a test of the Puppet Master's financial strength. Even if the puppeteer who created it was a rookie, he could easily defeat a dozen masterpieces made from ordinary magic gold. According to Angus, the Greto family, which challenged his family this year, had been searching for all kinds of rare metal for puppets. It was said that in order to win this competition, they were secretly creating a special type of combat puppet, but it was hard to find any specific information. After sending Angus off, Grimm immediately locked himself in his stone room and began to study the special profession of Puppet Master. Of course, Puppet Master was just a general term. If it was further divided, it could be divided into more than a dozen different branches of Puppet Master. The things they created included golems, puppets, runes, mechanical beasts, alchemy lives, animated creations, elemental puppets, magic machines, the differences between them might be indistinguishable in the eyes of outsiders. But in the eyes of the puppet masters, they were all fundamentally different from each other. Take Grimm's puppet, for example. It was very different from ordinary puppets and golems. Under normal circumstances, when a puppet maker created a golem or a marionette, he or she would have to spend a lot of precious magical metals. They used magic-conducting metals to create the inner core of the marionette, then used magic-resistant metals to create an indestructible body for the marionette. Coupled with humanoid joints, an excellent transmission mechanism, a hidden energy transmission pipeline, and an intricate control circuit. With all these, a qualified magic puppet could be considered to have been created. The energy source that drove these marionettes to fight and move was the energy crystals embedded in their bodies, which were also known as magic crystals. Therefore, compared to magic puppets, these magic puppets generally had real bodies. Puppeteer's job was to design and modify the spell formation inside the marionette, so that it could be more closely integrated with the marionette. That way, it would be easier for the marionette to move such a huge lump of iron. As for magic puppets, they were nothing more than elemental puppets. At the beginning of the summoning, they did not have a real body, only a summoning crystal core that was engraved with many spell formations. They relied on the free elemental energy naturally absorbed by the crystal core and extracted the corresponding elemental substances from the surrounding environment. Then, they used the spell formation to control the elemental substances to form their temporary bodies. In terms of combat power, magic puppets were definitely not as strong as golems or marionettes. However, magic puppets had an advantage over their opponents, which was that they were easy to carry around. When not in use, magic puppets could dispel their temporary bodies and turn themselves back into a crystal the size of a pigeon egg, which could be carried around. Golems or marionettes were usually 4 to 5 meters tall and weighed more than 10 tons. They could not be folded or shrunk. No matter how powerful these marionettes were, they could not be carried around all over the world every day. Moreover, the number of magic crystals used to drive them was not a small number, not to mention the consumption during battles. Therefore, combat golems and marionettes were usually only equipped in fixed witchcraft facilities. Usually, they were used to patrol and prevent enemies from invading. Their work efficiency was much higher than that of wizards or wizard guards. When they were free, they could also rely on the energy pool in the witchcraft facilities to recharge. This way, they could save a lot of magic crystals. However, Grimm had heard that some top-level marionettes could create a special spatial tool that could be used to store golems and marionettes. They were called marionette amulets. However, the cost of creating these marionette amulets was not cheaper than creating top-level marionettes. Therefore, it was difficult to promote them on a large scale. They could only be used to store those elite marionettes with exquisite bodies but powerful combat power. Considering all these factors, Grimm still felt that magic puppets were more suitable for him than marionettes. However, now that he had to fight against a true marionette master, he could ignore the transportation and price factors. Instead, he had to consider their combat power. Both parties were grade 1 wizards, and it was impossible for them to create a witchcraft that was higher than their own level. At this time, the weakness of magic puppets without a strong body would undoubtedly be exposed when they fought against the metal marionettes. Therefore, if he really wanted to fight with his opponent, avoiding a head-on confrontation was the only way to win. Although Grimm was extremely confident in his Inferno Tyrant, considering that things were unpredictable, he felt that it was better to prepare some strategies and tactics for the Inferno Tyrant in advance. Otherwise, if he really encountered a terrifying adamantine golem in the arena, and the Inferno Tyrant was faced with a metal lump that he could not chew or touch, there was a possibility that he would fail miserably. No matter how skilled he was still afraid of a kitchen knife. And Magus time would always be very precious. 3 days might be a long time for ordinary people, but for a Magus who was immersed in his own research, it was not even enough time to take a nap. 3 days later, a new flying ship arrived, bringing with it 15 magi. Therefore, the floating warship that had gathered the required number of magi set sail without hesitation. The space inside the floating warship was much larger than the previous flying ship, but most of the space was reserved for a huge amount of goods. The remaining space still needed to carry some essential war wizard tools, so the living space left for the magi was still very small. For the magi on the floating warship, they were the ship's passengers, and, at the same time, they were also the ship's guardians. There were only 5 magi sent by the Silver Alliance on each floating warship, and most of them were only responsible for maintenance and management. If the floating warship encountered an attack from a magical creature while crossing the sea route, the magi on the ship had the duty and responsibility to kill or expel them together. This was something that every magus who boarded the ship had already signed a wizard contract in advance. If any magus refused to contribute when needed, the magi of the Silver Alliance had the right to expel them. No matter how powerful a magus was, if he was chased off the ship halfway, the fate that awaited him was practically sealed. When she understood the rules for boarding the ship, Alice muttered with dissatisfaction, "These magi of the Silver Alliance are really too calculative. Isn't this equivalent to taking the ship's fee from the foreign magi and using them as free bodyguards?" The goblin KB also nodded vigorously at the side, expressing his agreement. Grim laughed. "This is their territory, so of course everything has to follow their rules. The two of you have to be careful too. When we reach Sky City, don't say such offensive words so casually. Otherwise, even I won't be able to save you if you provoke the silver-robed enforcers." Magus Angus curiously observed the trio from the side. A magus, a prospective magus, and a strange green goblin. It was hard to imagine how they had managed to get together with such a disparity in levels. In the world of magi, only magi of the same status were worthy of being treated as equals. Everything else was either slaves or usable humanoid resources. It was impossible for all races and classes to interact with each other on an equal footing. A magus might treat a prospective magus kindly and show great care and concern. This meant that the prospective magus was either his disciple or that the prospective magus was his blood relative. Apart from these, there were no other possibilities. As for why a magus would speak to a green goblin so amiably, the only possibility was that he didn't want to scare the green goblin and affect his ongoing experiments. However, the scene in front of him was clearly not within the scope of his common sense. This newly promoted Wizard Grim was obviously communicating with the little girl and the green goblin in a more equal manner. In the eyes of most magi, this was a disgrace to their status. After all, Grim had just become a magus, so he might not have gotten rid of his old habits and attitude. Perhaps after a period of time, he would be able to adapt to the life of a magus and change. Wizard Angus comforted himself like this, so he did not take the initiative to correct Wizard Grim's mistake. The cargo on the floating battleship had already been prepared. When a number of magi had reached the required number, the magi who had been waiting for a long time boarded the battleship one after another. This was the first time Grim had seen so many magi in his life. Even during the last dimensional war, when the Salubo family had sent out almost all of their forces, there were only 20 to 30 magi on the battlefield. But today, these magi were wearing all kinds of robes, leather armor, and special armors. They were all gathered in front of him and quietly boarded the floating battleship in an orderly manner. The shock brought to Grim made his mouth go dry. When you lived in a small, isolated area, the identity of a magus would allow you to enjoy a luxurious lifestyle far beyond that of a noble. In a banquet hall filled with feasting lights, you would be the ruler of many nobles, big or small, fighting to please. You would also be the target of many flirtatious ladies and beautiful girls. Drinking wine, beauties, and absolute power. All of these would make you feel like you were the ruler of this world. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.